I think before we get started, I think it is important to acknowledge that the land we see it is the tradition. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and we respect their rights, and all that goes with that acknowledgement statement. We recognize that it's a privilege to be here because they traditionally own this land. And look, welcome to our childhood trauma session. This, I guess, is a sequel to the series of mental well-being that the committee that has been tasked with this responsibility has been doing. This is the second workshop we are running towards this very, very, very important topic. And by the way, for those who are tuned in online, welcome. Yeah, be part of this. The session is now formally started. And look, childhood trauma is a very interesting topic. And I know we've got experts in the field here who will give us a bit of an in-depth into this very, very complicated topic. And let's get the most out of them because they are the expert. They know the field very well in this very, very interesting topic. From my own perspective, when I reflect on childhood trauma, very, very quick, 2 minutes. I still remember when I was a small boy and throughout my growing up as an adult, I still remember a joke to the effect that when you see somebody doing something that you deemed as weird or out of context, we used to say, and pardon my Kikuyu language, we used to say, "Tigana nake niaguire na goi." Loosely translated, that meant goi in Kikuyu is that child harness thing that you hold the baby with, and I think the context around it is that back in those days, it was possible for a child to slip through that harness and fall off from the caring hands of the mother, and if the child did that, even so the child doesn't die or doesn't get physical injury, it had a way of later on in life having sort of, I think it must have been maybe impact on the brain or something. And we used to use that context that huyu aliyagukana or this fell with the harnesser. And today there is a real opportunity to unpack that. What does it mean that the child fell with a harnesser? And unpacking some of those experiences that one goes through in childhood and what it means from a psychological point of view. And the experts will unpack all that. Now, I will shortly invite my younger sister, Auntie Shah, to, she's there, Auntie Shah to come and open with a word of prayer. After she does the word of prayers, Auntie Shah will give us a bit of a context around today's session and importantly how it links with the previous session we had on the mental wellness. She'll link all that and provide a bit of a community context around that. Thereafter, after Auntie Shah does that, I will ask my good friend Leisho to lead us in a quick exercise just to flex our bodies and get set for the session. And after she does that, I'll hand over the mic to my good friend Emsu, who will be the moderator or facilitator of tonight's session. And the reason is that she does it very, very, very well. And she did last time so well that everybody was asking, where is Emsu, where is Emsu, and so on and so on. So without further ado, I will now call upon Auntie Shah or Mrs. Charity Mwangi. And
we held our first session last year, and we did feel there is need to be continuity. The first one was just creating awareness about the mental health. There is that need, and we have been feeling together with the panelists here, and I'm sure with all of you sitting here, that we cannot say we do not have an elephant in the room. In our community, we've met them across our workplaces. We are so blessed as a community. We have many people working in the mental health facilities and our hospitals, and we could see the statistics are telling us we need to do something. We need to do come together as a community and do something, and try and find out how can we as a community help ourselves, one another. It was about removing the stigma about mental health then. We've been listening to what people have responded to our first session, and everyone was feeling that the word mental in itself is still stigmatizing when we are asking people to come for a mental health session. So in addressing that, we have changed. We are calling it a mind wellness session. We do not want to stigmatize people with the title that we use, and that's where we are in session. We will be continuing the series depending on what we are told by the feedbacks. We are looking and we are listening, and we believe together we will tackle this challenge, whichever way. We are so incredibly blessed as a community. We have the medical doctors, we have psychiatrists, and I want to honor one of our panelists, Dr. Angela, who has come all the way from Melbourne to be in this session. Heart of applause to her. It's dedication, commitment, sacrifice. And so today we are here, for we have seen that the wellness of our mind, the mind wellness as well matters together. And so we will be learning today from our trained professionals. We have to learn to listen to what our mind is telling our body and our soul. And I'm getting very excited that this afternoon we will learn what the mind is communicating to the soul. When you are saying that I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling excited, or I'm feeling inferior, but I'm feeling just stressed or anxious and all that. So this session will be covering all that. And I thank God that we have our trained professionals again to help us with that. And for us to start, I will lead us in a prayer. Thank you, Holy Spirit of God, for you're here. You're going to be ministering unto us. I want to thank you, everyone, for your turning up this afternoon. Whether you're watching us online or you're here sitting in the pews, I pray that whatever we are going to be having this afternoon will be beneficial to your understanding of this complex subject of childhood trauma. I pray that our Father, you will be with us. You will help us when we feel like we are having to relive experiences that we have put down at the bottom of our minds, and now we are bringing it to the front of our mind to address it. But it's going to be educative, and the Holy Spirit of God, you will be ministering to everyone who feels that that is what it is, because you really understand our minds and our body and our spirit and how they should be functioning operationally. We are seeking for your grace. And I pray that as we start, you will be starting with us, and to the end, you will be with us. I thank you. I give you glory, honor, and all the adoration worthy unto your name. It is in Jesus' name that I do pray and give thanks. Amen. Amen. May the Lord help you, and thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Auntie Shah. That was an excellent treatise into the exercise, the recapping on where we've come from and where we are going. So thank you for that. And I think we must also thank you for, I think what I did mention earlier on is that you've been the engine of driving this initiative, and you put in a gazillion hours in getting the competent team of experts together, and For that, we are deeply grateful for your effort, and thank you so much for that. Now, I'll call upon Rachel. Rachel has an amazing exercise that we need to do to get us before we deep dive into the session. She'll tell us what to do. She proposed this exercise. I read it. It's nice. It's beautiful. Brace yourself for what's coming. She's an amazing Rachel. Over to you.
You're so serious. Everyone is so serious. And I am having butterflies in my stomach. I don't know whether other people in the panel are feeling the same. I don't know how you guys are feeling, and what you're expecting today, but I would like us to acknowledge how we're feeling before this interesting topic begins. So let's get to it. So the reason why we decided, I guess, to have a bit of a mindful stretching, I guess, start of, before we start the panel is because this is going to be a really, really intense topic. Childhood trauma, really, and we'll talk about it. It does affect, like Auntie Shah was saying, the mind, the body, all of ourselves. So if you could please join me. I'm moving a lot because I'm feeling very uncomfortable and my body is feeling a bit nervous, and I can feel all these emotions and sensations. So I'd like you guys to also stand up and feel the same with me. Bring your awareness to how you are present in this room. And just stand still, hold your hands however is comfortable for you. And this is obviously very personal to each and everyone. I guess I'm just sharing because I've got the mic, but you can whisper it to yourself. But I think, the whole idea about wellness is, about embracing all of you, embracing the emotions, the sensations, everything that you are, and how you show up in places, in experiences, in interactions with each other. So I think if we could just, I guess, with our feet on the ground, bring that awareness and attention to us standing here in this building today, and having this opportunity to, I guess, discuss really, really intense things from either our childhood, about how those things affect us today. And I would like us to just observe how our body is feeling about that in the presence, in anticipation to that, the sensations we're having, I guess starting from our feet, and our stomach, our everywhere. And then if you can, you can move around your hands if you need to, stretch a little bit. I know it feels a bit weird. If you don't need to stretch, you don't have to do it. And I know it's not very usual that you get to do things like this. So you can reach up as high as you can. Just feel what your body needs and do that. You can bring down your hands, your arms, and just shake them. Just shake them. Movement is really, really, really good for you. That's why they keep talking about exercise and yoga and things like that. Shake your legs if you like. And then just feel how you're feeling in your body right now. And I think get ready for a real, probably hard, challenging conversation. And I would also really like don't hold on to these if you need to talk to someone, if you need to step out of the room, it's really, really important that you do that for you. Observe your body. And I guess that's why we've started with this exercise. It can be triggering, talking about memories of the past and things that continue to be quite raw for you. So if you need to stretch out, if you need to step out of the room, if you need to separate yourself, nothing is weird in this space. And you do what you need to do for your body. Right? I think that's it. You feeling a bit better? Or not, and that's okay too.
There is no way on earth Dawn was going to do that. She would have messed it completely. So thank you, Rachel. And Rachel is one of the emerging leaders in this community. And yeah, she came here as an international student, and look what Australia produces. You know, a very solid leader. And thanks, Rachel, for that. Yeah. Now that I felt good actually. But part of the reason I was saying you do it because I actually wanted to consume the benefit of it being done by someone else. And I'll now call upon Emsu or Mary Derry to come over and formally now kick off the panel discussion, introduce the amazing speakers we have, and she will moderate or facilitate or guide, whichever terminology, our formal session. Emsu, the floor is yours. You are amazing, isn't she? Let's give her a hand as she. Emsu, the floor is yours. You are amazing, isn't she? Let's give her a hand as she.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll still keep my seat if you'll allow me to, so that it's easy for me to pass the mic. As you have heard, my name is Mary Nderi, or Emsu. Many people know me as Emsu. And it's an honor and a privilege to facilitate this session. I'm here to learn, and first of all, I'm here to unlearn and then learn and relearn what this amazing panel and of experts are here to offer with us. I'm going to issue a disclaimer. I'm not an expert in this field. As I have said, I'm here to learn, and I'm sure that you're here with me. So let's be receptive and ready to, unlearn and relearn what our panel of experts are here to tell us. Thank you so much for coming. This is amazing to have you guys offer your knowledge and also to sacrifice your time to come and be with us in this session. And I hope that we can tap into that knowledge as much as we can. Before we say anything, there's a mic that's close to you. I'm just going to get each one of you to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your background so that in case anyone wants to reach out to any one of them, you know who to reach out to, what specific need you have. And because I am very funny, I'm going to ask you to tell us something funny about yourself. And if I don't laugh, you owe me lunch. Yes. No, we'll have very many lunch dates, so you better make me laugh. We'll start from that end. I'll put Mr. Ndwati on the spot. Kindly just introduce yourself.
Interest in this topic is because I do have a background. When my life started, I thought I was going to become a minister. That's what I thought I was going to become. So maybe I'm traumatized, we'll find out. But I studied Bible, I've studied theology to a master's level and things like that. So I bring that perspective, or rather I carry that with me. So as you can imagine, there's a lot to unpack in there. Thank you so much.
Hi guys, I'm Grace. I think I'll echo his remarks. I'm definitely not an expert in the mental health field. But I'm grateful for Auntie Shah for introducing or allowing me to be part of the panel. I am a medical doctor, but I work in surgery. But I think what I might be able to offer the panel is the fact that I'm probably one of the first, kids to grow up in Australia having immigrated here, 22, 23 years ago now. And that carries, a special set of difficult circumstances, which I think, unfortunately, a few of my peers are still, going through. And I think that's definitely an important topic for us to start to talk about. So, yes, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Rachel is my name, and I am trained as a social worker. I am also trained in developmental trauma. I have some work experience as well in both trauma therapist and also social work. So I bring all my skills and knowledge together and do something with it. I don't know whether it's helpful sometimes or not, but I just do. And I think I wouldn't consider myself an expert in the field, but because at the end of the day, also, there's a lot of study that is happening in the field of trauma. And even the experts that we learn from are constantly saying, these are just ideas that we have, whether they're true or not. They explain certain things. The research does explain certain things. But up until now, this is what we know, and this is how we make sense of the things that, I guess, we see people experience from their early childhood experiences. So I will be sharing from that perspective of, I guess, me, myself being a child within our context of growing up in Kenya, in that culture, coming here, having a different culture. It's an intersect culture between, I guess, being here 11 years later, reflecting on my experiences of coming here, and how, I guess, my own childhood trauma experiences have transformed in different ways. Now knowing having the knowledge and the skills that I have. So I'll be talking a little bit about that.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all here. I'm Dr. Angela Okungu. By trade, I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I've lived in Adelaide for probably going on, I think, 21, 22 years now. And I've worked in the public mental health system in SA for probably 15 years. I'm very passionate about the subject. As part of work involved with psychotherapy, psychological therapies, I guess medical diagnosis of the intersection between physical health and mental health. To see less stigma about the subject in the community, more people accessing services, and us helping each other along the journey, because mental wellness, health, and holistic wellness impacts everyone at different levels. So very glad to be part of the team.
Hi, my name is Susan Kamau. I live in the Riverland of South Australia. My qualifications, I suppose, to be here is that I was a child. You laughing? I'm not now. Many, many years have passed, and I have studied as a counselor first, and then as a social worker. I have worked with young people. I am now working with adults, so I sit across two services, and I do that in mental health psychological therapies.
Thank you, Susan. My name is Mary Awata. I'm a social worker and a developmental educator and founder of Bora Care, which is a disability service and specializing in children, particularly children who've experienced trauma. And as Rachel has said, it's actually a contested idea at the moment, because even with the young people that we support, when you take them to hospital, they say, no, it's behavioral, take them back home. And then you go to other services, they say it's a learned behavior or it's a socially constructed phenomenon. So it's a very heavily contested, however, it's real, and it's really an important topic. It touches my heart because if we do it right when children are young, then it changes their schema as they develop into adults. So I'm really glad to be here to learn as well, but also just to give my knowledge and experience in this space.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Calvin Biambo, and I'm also very much privileged to be part of the panel this afternoon to talk about this wonderful, wonderful topic that pretty much myself has been part of my life for a very, very long time. And I'm in child protection, so I'm a social worker as well. And at this particular time, I'm very much privileged to look after all the migrant families across South Australia. So I see all families from refugee asylum seeker backgrounds. And this topic is always absolutely critical. And it's something that I've spent so many years in Kenya working with families, so young people who are in out-of-home care. I don't know whether you guys remember back in Kenya, we got the rescue centers, those who can remember the rescue centers. I spent a lot of years working in those rescue centers, and I think this becomes absolutely critical for us to be able to understand some of this stuff that we never really talked about. So I'm really, really looking forward to share some of those perspectives from a child protection point of view. And I know that some of us, when it comes to child protection, we feel a bit uneasy, but it's okay. We'll be able to unpack some of those worries. Thank you.
I don't know if you are counting with me, but I have 5 lunches. Angela, I'll get you to go Monday because I think you have to travel back to Melbourne. But yes, 5 lunches. So I think I'm sorted for next week, Monday to Friday. Please clap for me. Thank you. This is an easy way to get lunch. So next time, please offer to be the moderator for the session. Anyway, we acknowledge that this can be quite an intense subject and can raise a lot of emotions. And I like what Dr. Angela has said about less stigmatizing this topic, and especially from our cultural background, because you're a boy, you don't cry, or like, you know, get over it. In our language, in some way you are told to get over it. And I think we've grown up to think that if you pay attention to these feelings, you're weak, you know. But the more we destigmatize these things and talk about it, then we're able to deal with them. So in case at any one point you feel like you want to talk to someone during the session, or you feel like you need to debrief or walk out, please do that. And there's a number that is going to be projected on the screen right now. If you feel like you want to talk to someone, there's people at the back who are happy to have a chat with you in a room that's allocated at the back. Please text that number and someone will meet you at the back and show you that little room. Thank you so much for those people who have just joined us. We are going to now go into the questions, the topics that we're going to cover today. Of course, our main topic is childhood trauma. And just to kick us off, I'm going to ask Dr. Angela to kindly give us an overview of the different types of trauma.
I'll start with maybe a general definition of trauma. Trauma can generally be described as an experience, any experience that an individual faces that can affect their physical or psychological integrity. And that experience would be one that overwhelms their capacity to cope. Usually, trauma is mediated by centers in the brain, the fear center, the amygdala, and also involves the limbic system, which regulates emotions. And this often leads to a physiological, like a body stress response. So in terms of, I guess, distinguishing, one of the panelists before made an important point. We're not saying all types of stress are bad, but we're saying toxic stress that's trauma related can have a lot of impact on the body. So you might find that your body is producing a lot of cortisol, adrenaline, usually in common language, what we call the fight or flight response. And if you're sort of caught up in situations that are chronic or enduring, and your body is always in this fight or flight response, it can then shape you in a way that leads to more maladaptive use of coping strategies, which then lead on to other flow-on effects, can affect your sense of self, your relationships, and just how you see the world in general. And I think a second part of that was different types of trauma. I guess traumas can be personal, so things that you go through, maybe emotional trauma, physical trauma, for old people, sexual trauma, sexual violence. There's also collective trauma that affects communities as a whole. For us as migrants, maybe things like systemic racism, meeting barriers and different challenges in different areas you may go that's race-based, for example. Things like exposure to war could be considered a collective sort of trauma. In childhood, which my colleague will speak about, there's relationship, attachment trauma, and various other incidents, such as maybe separation from caregivers at an early age, or death or loss of a loved one, displacement for whatever reason. All these things can be qualified as trauma because they're affecting your physical or psychological state.
Thanks, Angie, for that. Dr. Angie, thank you for sharing with us the general overview of what trauma is. I like something that Susan said about her being a child, and I think that's where we all start life at. So that's really good because we're talking about childhood trauma. It takes us back to when we were children, and for us who are still children, we can really identify with this topic. I'm just going to get Rachel to explain to us what childhood trauma is.
So Angela has mentioned a little bit of that so childhood trauma, as the word says, starts in childhood. That's very obvious. It's also called developmental trauma because also throughout, so we call different phases of our lives, we're always developing as human beings, okay? So in particular, when we are little, starting from being in utero, the mother's utero, in the womb, trauma can actually affect a child as early as in fetus. So and also just, I'll talk about first, so it happens obviously in childhood. It happens very much in a context of relationships. So as a child, the person that is, who cares for you, your parent, and also within that context of family, that's where we mostly spend our times. Within our home, within that caregiving relationship with our parent, and obviously being in utero is one of them as well. So when really terrible things are happening to mom, when mom is pregnant, if they're highly stressed, chronically stressed for extended periods of time, that does affect baby in utero. So that's one of the ways and places that can start. So baby is born, what happens then is if this baby is also within an environment that is very toxic in terms of, so for example, baby is only, few months, few weeks, a year old, and the environment that the baby is in within the home, there is, constant fights, whether it's verbal fighting between parents, if there is physical fighting where obviously, for example, parents are fighting physically, that can really be very toxic to the baby and can cause some of the childhood trauma. Obviously, there's also the risk of the child being hurt, physically hurt, if people are fighting. The other thing with that is also the potential emotional neglect that may happen when mom is really preoccupied with trying to survive the moment, if she's fearing for her life, if emotionally she's struggling to connect with this baby because she's trying to stay safe from this person who's possibly abusing her, hitting her, however that may look like. So that's the other way that an environment can be very toxic and can cause childhood trauma to a child. So if that happens from utero, from 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, every single day for your entire childhood until you're 18, until you move out of home, you haven't seen a single, I guess, well, sometimes you see, probably good interactions, but the reason why constant exposure and repeated exposure to these really, really terrible experiences that are constantly making you feel so afraid, you're like, you don't know, it's a very unpredictable environment. You don't know what dad's gonna do next. You don't know whether mom's gonna, see me cry, see me hurt, because she's so preoccupied with just making sure that she doesn't do anything wrong, because if she does, she's gonna be in trouble. If you're constantly in that state, that has an impact on you. And if you never have an opportunity whereby you're removed from that environment and you provided new ways, and there's repair within those relationships within you as a child and the parent. If the parent never apologizes and actually changes behavior, you carry that around. But also within that, there's also the everyday interactions. How does my mom meet my needs as a child? Do they realize that I'm upset? Do they realize that I'm afraid in this household? And, yes, it's not always all bad. There's times that, people are in good spirits, and that's great. But there's always the sense that because, you feel like it's an everyday thing, or it happens once every couple of days or something, you're always waiting as a child. You're always waiting for that to happen. And that, as Dr. Angela was saying, your cortisol levels are constantly high. That's the hormone, the stress hormone. If that's your everyday constant anticipation that I don't know what's going to happen, you startle everything, if a door opens, you startle. That has a real impact on you. So I know we're going on and on, but I just need to give a bit context, because so in childhood trauma, so you need to understand normal child development to understand, I guess, when normal child development happens, there's milestones that you have to meet as a child and eventually as an adult. If trauma is affecting your normal development, you don't meet your constant milestones very well. So learning becomes quite difficult. Socializing becomes quite difficult. It's like you regress, or those skills suppress. The skills are not developing as good as they should, because also you're within a care environment where you don't see people interacting very nicely. People actually don't like each other in my home. How am I supposed to like other people when I go out? You see other people, when you grow and go to school, you see people interacting in different ways. You learn different ways of interacting. And sometimes there's moments where you're like, oh, you can do that, you can do that. You can, interact in such lovely, nice, kind ways to each other, because that hasn't really been modeled to you as a child. So the model that I look at that is through developmental trauma studies, you learn about the brain. So neurobiology. So any human being, we all have a brain. So a brain is a really, really important part of us. So every single sensory input that comes to our body. So right now, you're getting my voice and you're looking at me. Everything that you can see, every experience you have in this room right now is going straight to your brain. And what happens is, so just a normal, non-threatening, I guess, experience, you go to your brain, it's processed, and then you make sense of what's happening to you. So that's the same for any, a child who's a fetus in mom's womb. And also it's that the same thing happens when a child is born. They're out of the womb. So they take in, even when we say the baby, it's only a baby, it doesn't know what's happening. No, everything sensory we take in. And just because babies can't speak doesn't mean that they are not taking in all the sensory things that are happening around them. that's why things like domestic violence is very, very detrimental to babies, even when they don't know, what's or can't make sense of what's happening. And then, so taking in all this information, and so what happens is those memories are stored very implicitly in our bodies. So that's why when we feel, for example, triggered, I know it's a word that gets used a lot. So we feel certain ways in our bodies that you feel really upset, you feel very angry, but you don't know where this is coming from. It's because you've had similar experiences in the past that have been very, very implicitly, maybe they threatened you, they were frightening. So, and these are the memories that get stored in our bodies. And that's why we say, you've probably heard of the book, that the body keeps the score. Everything we take in comes to the brain, into our bodies, and these memories are stuck there. So if you never have experiences where your trauma experiences were repaired, no one ever acknowledged that. That would have been really, really difficult, just being in that environment. And really, you're not going to know if you're in a stressful environment as a baby, when it was so stressful for your mom or, whoever was caring for you. That gets stored in. But the good thing also about the brain and neurobiology is there's hope in neuroplasticity. So there's lots of research in neuroplasticity. And because the brain grows the most in childhood, it's also most plastic in childhood, which means that, yes, you can take on a lot, but with opportunity to repair that, you can heal. So baby can heal within the right environment. And I guess, I'm talking about all of these little things, just all of that to say that for a good, normally developing brain, we need really safe relationships. We need safe environments to grow up in. We need, I'd written something else because I know I always forget that one. So we need safe experiences, safe environments, safe relationships that can, because again, babies, they don't have the emotional awareness, like Dr. Angela said. They don't have the emotional awareness, and that can only grow if their emotional awareness is nurtured and taught and supported by their parents. So we learn our emotional, we grow our emotional template basically from our parents. So if parents had not a great emotional template, guess what? It's possible that we're going to take that on very, very unconsciously, very, very implicitly. So when those things affect us later on in life, we wonder, where is this coming from? And unless you stop and think, oh, this actually happened. And so that's basically it. And I'm sorry for the long answer, but I get too passionate about this.
For that extensive answer, we have definitely learned a lot. You've taken us from the very basics of developmental trauma, and we've learned something from it. And I guess you've covered the clinical side of the definition of childhood trauma. I'm keen to hear from Dr. Grace and Ndwati what they think of trauma. What would be your definition of trauma?
That's such a big question, because I guess it's I would imagine a very variable experience for everybody. And, we all, I imagine, have, different levels of resilience based on our own experiences. And so what might be particularly traumatizing for me, maybe be that traumatizing for Rachel. But I think what I found to be, I guess, something fundamental to discussing trauma is being very respectful of someone presenting you with a traumatic experience, despite your perception of it not being, I'm sure we've all had discussions with someone where they've told you something and it's come off, like, and I was so traumatized by that. And you're like, that's not that bad. But you just have to honor their experience, honor that was really traumatic for them. And I think that's also, that validation goes a long way in helping them process their experience. So I guess to answer your question, I think trauma is very broad, but we just have to respect our own individual, I guess, perceptions of what was traumatic or not traumatic for us.
100%. I agree with that, because each of our experiences as we go through life, the reason why one person will find certain experience more traumatizing than, another person, or just, doesn't really, it's because we attach stories to those experiences. So of course, if you didn't have, for example, something didn't trigger you, it's possibly because you don't have an early childhood story that would have been upsetting for you. But then someone else, you don't, and that's the thing, we have to honor and be kind to each other when, if someone is saying this is really having, and that's why I was really insisting that just make sure you observe yourself, because no one's gonna know how you're gonna feel. Unless you know it yourself, it's just gonna be so hard, and you're constantly gonna probably get experiences where you're invalidated. But just to reinforce that each person's experience is really, really important, and just watching that in yourself.
Thank you. So with trauma, what I've come to learn is that trauma is basically anything that incapacitates you, anything that happens to you that defeats your ability to cope. So I've learned about this term they call the adverse experiences that we all have. You could lose a parent, you grew up in poverty, you were bullied in school. All those are adverse experiences that you had in your life, but they don't always add up to being traumatic events for many reasons. One of the other fellows, I cannot pronounce his name, also says trauma is not what happened to you, it will happen in you. So we could all be, this building could collapse or something happens and we get out, but all of us will react differently, because it's not so much the event that building collapsed and we all, oh my God, what happened? It's really, how did you internalize and how does your brain interpret all of that? And then thirdly, what I'd like to say is also that I've come to learn that with trauma, in spite of the intentions, despite the intentions of the person, say for example, someone did something wrong to you, it doesn't become traumatic because they intended to. There's some things that might have happened to you that no one intended to hurt you, but you and I, you referring to anybody, I'm not pointing at you, I'm just saying you, I can't say you without looking at you, so I'll look over there. So you experienced that, and it's traumatic to you. Years later, you're struggling with that, but nobody intended to hurt you, so I find that to be quite a nuance to the definition of what childhood trauma is all about.
I think we all have a good understanding of what trauma generally is, and also what childhood trauma is. And I think, as I said, I'm here to learn. And I think one of the things that I have already picked up is I resonate with what Dr. Grace has said about respecting the way people present and the way they manifest their trauma. Because sometimes we want, like I said, we want people to, get over it and continue on. And the illustration that Ndwati has given us about the building like collapsing and how the way people would present differently. And I guess what I'm saying is for us to be able to extend some extra grace to the people that we interact with on a daily basis, because you don't know my story, you don't know whether today I woke up triggered by something that I experienced last night, and that triggered some sort of emotions that takes me back to my childhood trauma. Today we were having a discussion with Calvin and Pastor Teresa at the corner. Then we were talking about our growing up, and when you look at the definition of childhood trauma, to be honest, I think we're all traumatized to some degree, but we also say that our parents did what they thought was best, so we forgive them for what they did and we strive to do better. So I think in saying that, like you said, it's good to respect people in the way that they present themselves, and also trying to meet people where they are at, because I think that's the only way we help ourselves get out of these traumatic experiences that we have experienced in the past. Calvin, what would you tell us of symptoms of trauma?
Thank you, Mary. I think when it comes to the whole topic of trauma, one thing that normally fascinates me is when I see behaviors that really points to the direction of trauma, so trauma-related behaviors, and more so in young people. I'll give a story. It won't be long. I was privileged, as I mentioned before, to work in Kenya with young people who were exposed to quite a lot of trauma. And we had these two little boys, and they were about 10 and 6 when they came to us. They were quite exposed to what I would describe as a very, very chaotic home environment. There's a lot of domestic violence. And unfortunately, as a result of that, the father ended up killing the mom as a result of that. So these kids were exposed to all this. And these kids came to us, and I remember when they first came to us, their behaviors were quite concerning. You know, we had one, the younger one, if another child would do something for him, he would react by being extremely violent. And by then in Kenya, that was way in 2004, we were working as youth workers in these rescue centers, and we didn't really know how best to respond to these kids who were exposed to quite a lot of traumatic experiences. And the way we were responding to it was exactly the same way all of you guys might know. We were quite a bit heavy-handed in terms of using kiboko and not knowing that actually we were really traumatizing these kids. And it's something that I'm guilty of because I worked in that facility for about 7 years. And when I migrated to Australia, I went straight into working in residential care in the Department for Child Protection. And for you guys who might have had an experience working in residential care, we've got kids who sometimes we wonder, oh my God, what sort of kids are these? Like when we look at the behaviors that is really showing within the facility, it's something that really, really is scary to think about. And you think about us back in Kenya, looking at these kids, not knowing anything about this trauma, responding the way we are responding, but doing that work here, we have to respond differently because these therapeutic models have been put in place to be able to support kids in a much better way. So I think to me, when I think about childhood trauma, I do normally think about those trauma-related behaviors and why this is important from a child protection point of view, because that's the number one reason why we exist. Because if we see a family who is struggling, I think Rachel did mention the impact of the family environment and how that contributes to childhood trauma, and being the number one reason why sometimes, unfortunately, if we work with families who have come from refugee asylum seeker background, who are exposed to some of this stuff, and they've never really got any sort of therapeutic supports in place to support with those, then all of a sudden we get involved and we have to talk about how we can look at alternative care arrangement for the children. And it's very, very sad in most of the time because we understand that these are stuff that we never grew up with. We unfortunately didn't ask ourselves to go through trauma. But now we find ourselves whereby we didn't get any support for that. Now we have to pay the price because this in itself is now getting along the way in terms of how we are looking after our children. So to me, this becomes absolutely critical that we really understand what this childhood trauma is all about and how we can really, as parents, really protect our children against this. But unfortunately, the kids have already been exposed to, how can we get those supports in place?
Thank you so much, Calvin. I'm also going to ask Mary Awata. I know you're really passionate about this topic. I want you to also tell us your opinion of the symptoms of trauma.
So yeah, as Emsu has said, I'm very passionate about this. And having worked in the field long time ago in Resica, and also with families that were just in the border of interface with child protection, and now actually supporting children and young people who are in care and have also experienced trauma. So one of the things that we see, maybe I begin with the behaviors that we see that can be trivialized, is that because of the children or the young people don't understand what's happening for them, they cannot make sense of what they are feeling. Because for us as grown-ups, we can say, I feel really sad, I feel angry, I feel this. They actually don't have those definitions. So for them, it's projected differently. For them, it's projected through behavior. And when you don't have a trauma-informed practice, which picks on that, you will also take the social narrative of its behavior. So some of the common behaviors that we see, and what I'm about to say can be very difficult for some people, but the biggest thing that we see is self-harm, because they really want to ease that pain. It's a pain that they can't explain. So most of them self-harm, and they use different ways of self-harming. So they can actually cut themselves. They can swallow things. And I'm talking about things like glass, broken glass. They just want to end it. So that is the biggest challenge we have now, because we lose quite a lot of children apparently in this society through that. And some of them suicide. So in fact, in the environment, it has to really be scrutinized for any little thing that could be used as harm, including even a fan on a ceiling. Another thing is, because of the pain, they feel like running away literally from themselves. So what they do, they abscond, and it doesn't matter what's coming on. They just want to run away from what they are feeling. Some of the other things is property damage. They just damage anything, or assault, or even punch you and abuse you, the caregiver. And sometimes it's very easy, if you don't have a trauma-informed background, then you can actually get upset and even harm these kids more. And for somebody who cannot tolerate that, you'd rather remove yourself from that environment, because sometimes caregiving can also be care harming. Because, like, I'll just say what I always say about Dalai Lama. He said, if you can't look after people, don't even try. Like, almost move away from it. So unless it's your calling, unless it's your passion, listen to them. There's so many painful experiences that people, especially children and young people. But I just want to say something. However, there's actually hope that if therapeutic supports are provided, you'll actually really feel great to see the end of that. Because, like Rachel was saying, the brain is still, for young children, is still forming. So it's almost like a sponge. It can take in, it can also release. So those painful experiences can be released depending on how they actually get interactions from the adults that provide care, whether birth parents or even alternative care like we do. So it depends on how you respond. Instead of, why are you doing this? You could say, I understand you're really, upset about this, but tell me about how you're feeling, So that this person, and they tend to rupture relationships because that's what they're used to. They want to see whether you are actually going to be there for them or not. I could talk forever, so let me end it there.
Thank you so much for talking to us about the symptoms of trauma. I'm going to throw a new spanner in the works. We have focused on symptoms of trauma, especially with young people and children. But Susan, I would like for you to tell us a little bit more on symptoms of trauma in adults, how that would manifest in adults.
Symptoms of trauma in adults. Oh, well. Okay, first of all, when you have experienced trauma, your brain changes and you make adaptations. So when we see adults, what we actually hear is actually from your story, that you have played a certain role in either becoming a stabilizer in a very chaotic world, and you continue to hold on to those behaviors and bring them into each and every one of your, I guess, relationships and interactions, so that you actually fail to function well. So for instance, if you are criticized by your employer and you really lose your stack and you are very upset about everything, you are actually responding as a person who has been criticized very, very much in your childhood, and you have not stabilized that behavior. Now, you probably could not take that, and you have adapted to becoming a defensive person. You might not even realize that. You might be a person in an intimate relationship with your partner, and you might be unable to be intimate with that person. What is standing in the way? You do not know, you freeze, you dissociate. Those are symptoms of trauma. Because sometimes when you're so traumatized as a child, say you had a sexual abuse when you were a child, you could not run away physically. So you learned how to dissociate. So you disconnect, your mind actually disconnects. And so you cannot respond. So for adults, it's really complex. And there's a myriad of things. And sometimes it will be also in self-harm, as Mary said. It will also be in substance abuse, because what happens also is that to deal with your traumas, you medicate. You can medicate with amazingly great things like exercise. You can exercise a lot. You can work. You know, like how we in our society say, wow, these people work so well. Sometimes it isn't even that you're working that way. It is because you are so traumatized, trying to stabilize your disabled family, that the only thing that you can do is trust yourself to do everything yourself. And so you carry everybody's responsibility, and you carry a very deep sense of shame and guilt for being unable to do things and to fix things. So now, for instance, you go back home and maybe something's happening and you can't fix the relationships around you. You can't fix your wife, you can't fix your kids. You know, you feel like you're really out of your depths. You go and you work how many hours? However many hours, right? So you have all these, I suppose, behaviors that you're doing in order for you to, I guess you're responding actually as the child. It's the child that has grown up. And because you've become a complicated human being, you're managing things, and some of them very, very well. But what is the purpose for why you are doing the things you're doing? And some of them might be amazingly great things. People achieve a lot. But at the end, if you're feeling hollow, if your sense of identity is shattered, then it's likely that you have suffered childhood trauma.
Very much. At this point, I'm just going to let us know that we'll have a Q&A session. So there's a QR code that is projected on the screen. I don't know whether this is available for the people online, so that you can prepare for the questions that you might have even as you go on for the Q&A session that will follow up a bit later on. Thank you for that extensive answer into the way trauma manifests in adults. And I like something that you've said, that, you know, sometimes you see people working so hard and like, wow, they're like high achievers, but now to learn that they could be masking something underneath, and all like going home with that shame and, you know, sense of not having achieved anything despite how they are achieving is also something to look out for, you know, to just stop and think, why am I doing all this as an individual, so that you can resolve some of those traumas. Now, Dr. Angie, I'm just going to ask you to also expound on that a little bit. How do you, and I know Susan has touched on this, the coping mechanisms of trauma. Maybe I'll get you to share about the coping mechanisms of trauma in adults, and then I'll ask Rachel to also follow up on that with how kids cope with trauma.
In terms of the coping mechanisms, it's already been mentioned, would be things which are maladaptive. So at one point in the past, they worked and they were there, I guess, to help you get over that negative, toxic, or bad situation. But then down the track, things like substance abuse, for girls and women, especially in this culture, we see a lot of eating disorders developing, lots of excessive control. It might be that certain people get into harmful relationships or numerous relationships in a way that puts their own selves at risk through things like sort of developing diseases and whatnot. Self-harming has been mentioned. People can develop mood disorders, anxiety disorders, worst case, things like psychosis. So the effects of trauma can show in a lot of different ways. In relationships, I think one person has mentioned it can be that intergenerational component where perhaps the parents, for whatever reason, were traumatized and are now being ineffective parents and, in a sense, reliving the trauma and passing it on. So, it can show itself in multiple different ways in adults.
In children, I think this has already been mentioned by Mary, in the sense of because children are not able to, we have to make sense of this for children. We have to make sense of how they're feeling in their bodies because they don't have the language. And even sometimes when they do have the language where they can speak, they don't have the emotional language, especially because if they're traumatized, it's likely that the emotional sense has been shattered so much that either they were using the flight response or the fight response, or they were freezing. And if there hasn't been anyone around them to make sense of what that may have felt for them, whether it's in therapy, whether it's with a caregiver who can explain that to them, and really apologize on the behalf of those who cannot do that, it's going to be really difficult. And again, Mary mentioned about self-harming behaviors, a lot of really, really big behaviors where they're trying to fight and run away from themselves, or fight everyone around them, just banging their heads on really hard things that causes them lots of harm. Through my work, there is conversations about if you're in South Australia, you've heard about the ramping crisis, where ambulances are out waiting for ages. Some of the reasons why is because there's one of the biggest, population there is also teenage children who are self-harming or suicidal and need mental health response. The reason for that, most of that underlying stuff there is always childhood trauma and the fact that they don't really have enough support, to address that, to heal that, to recover and be supported. Yeah.
What I find really fascinating is, obviously, with most men, as we all know, that sometimes we've got that poor help-seeking behaviors, or we are not really comfortable with talking about some of those childhood experiences that can unfortunately lead to some of those, what I would describe as unsafe home environment for our children. And when it comes to situations like that, unfortunately, sometimes we find ourselves being forced to be able to talk about some of this stuff when, unfortunately, the police is involved or the child protection is involved, where we have to make a decision that the children have to come out. That's when we see men probably feeling like they have to now get some help. So I think from a child protection point of view, it's always very, very critical that as men, we feel like we can talk about some of those childhood experiences. And unfortunately, the only way I see men mask some of this stuff is by, resorting to those maladaptive ways of coping. And alcohol is probably one of the biggest problems, because back at home, there's only many few people who could afford beer, but over here is so much cheap. And we are seeing a lot of our men, not just from the Kenyan community, I would say, but more so from those families who are from refugee asylum seeker backgrounds, where we are seeing so many kids, unfortunately, coming into the care of the department because of these childhood experiences that are gone unresolved, and now they're finding ways to cope, which is very unfortunate.
Did you want to say something, Dr. Angela? Yeah?
Thank you, Calvin, for your comments. I think a big part of maybe what we haven't yet brought out is the intersection of culture and trauma. A lot of these experiences are obviously shaped by our context. And I think we shouldn't forget our culture and how that interplays with what people experience and how we see the world. I think Susan already brought out things like discipline methods, our views of gender stereotypes. Maybe in our homes we're bringing up our girls to do things a certain way, and our boys are doing things a certain way, and that's passing on this cultural beliefs that we've maybe grown up with that may not be so helpful. I guess it can be debated. Relationships and how men and women interact would be another thing, and quite central to trauma, as Calvin said, is the issue of discussing emotions. I think stereotypically, as Africans, we don't do that much. And maybe that's another part of the narrative that should be shifted and changed. And for us to normalize debriefing into the discussion before we're talking about something happens, let's look at what's the emotional valence of the thing that just happened. We might witness something sort of traumatic. Do we just kind of move on and assume and just kind of keep going, which is a very cultural way to do things? Do we stop and say, that made me really scared? And we're talking both men and women. I guess for women it's maybe different because by conditioning, that's what women do. We need to be challenged, but maybe for men, not so much normalized, and that's a very important thing that we need to pass on to the next generation. The importance of analyzing our experiences. Mary talked about naming feelings, naming emotion, and just that stopping and observing can really increase our emotional awareness and connect our minds and our bodies and our feelings. It's all very much interconnected and very complex.
Just wanted to add, thank you so much, because that was in my mind about intersectionality. Again, especially in formal cultures, sometimes we face a lot of things and our children face a lot of things. So, secondly, they're from different ways. Thirdly, they're visible. When they walk across the street, they're very visible. So all that visibility, gender, especially even for our young girls, all those, the intersectionalities, we intersect, but we rarely address that at home. When our children come back from kindy, from school, from everywhere, it's really important to ask them, how was your day? Have that open dialogue so that they can talk about what they went through that day. And sometimes in school, somebody would say something. I remember when we lived in Botswana, my daughter was about 7. Another child said, we don't like Makwereperes here. Makwereperes in South Africa or Botswana with people from another place, foreigners. And the next day she didn't want to go to school. And so we had to interrogate what that was about. So I really wanted to put it out there. Those are some of the conversations that we really have to speak to our children about, because that can be another layer of trauma.
100%. And I love how you connected that with, I guess, now our generation, people like Grace who, I guess, grew up here in the teenage years and all of that, how that looked like for them and how the our little kids, we're sending them to childcare, daycare, however you want to call it, and then they're hearing things, they are being called racial slurs by other children. And that's why it's really also important for us to also understand as Black people in this country, which is mainly white population. Obviously, there's the history of this country, which is very, and it's a whole thing on its own. But again, the people who, they're also Black people in this country, the indigenous people in this country. But then the context of, just lots of mainstream people, lots of white people, white children, what they see is just people in Black bodies. What does that mean for them? What stories have they grown up hearing about Black people? around the world. So that will come out, and that eventually, you don't have control of when your child goes to school. You have no control of them. But are you building yourself up in a way that you understand your position in this country, the places you occupy, the places that your child is going to occupy? You need to have the tools to be able to manage that in a way that is constructive, in a way that gives them the tools to manage and build their emotional capacity and resilience to be able to navigate that, because that is going to affect their self-identity, that's going to affect their self-worth. And if they're coming home and there's no that emotional support, that's going to be very, very, that's the stuff that ends up being mental health issues later in life. There is studies about how racism affects health outcomes later in life, and just generally trauma. So because even as little kids growing up in Kenya, if you went to school and you came home and you were really struggling at school and you came home and you didn't have someone to support you through that, or you had someone to support you through that, your outcome was very different with each other. You didn't have to learn from friends. You had supportive people who supported and carried you through that and helped you develop a sense of self that was very strong, that can navigate different places and all of that. So it's really important for us in these countries, Black people, whether it's you're getting various relationships with people of the same race or not in your similar race, understanding your own identity racially and culturally and being very grounded in that is really going to help you and also your children as they navigate these spaces within these countries. So it's really something really key, I guess, to think about.
Thank you very much. I think what we have learned from that discussion is that trauma does not only occur in the home, that it can also be external. I'm just going to share a really quick story. When my daughter started going to childcare, I noticed that when she came home, she would get on the bath and she'd try and cover herself with the soap. And I observed and I was like, what's wrong? She said, because I want to be white like the other kids at school. And I really had to work with her to empower her to, be comfortable in her skin and her own person and to, affirm her personality and, make her feel beautiful. And she knows now, she knows that. But I agree with you, we need to debrief with our children when they come home, ask them how their day was, but not just sometimes we can be so busy. We work in a very busy environment. You ask, but you won't listen. But I think our challenge is to ask, listen, but also observe so that you can be able to tell what needs to be addressed, because your child could be experiencing trauma that is external and you could be so blind to it, and that's why sometimes that ends up in manifesting your child cutting themselves up or self-harm and stuff like that. We need to be really, really aware of that. And also, I'm just going to bring us closer to the fact that most of us have come from overseas. Yeah, and then we've come into an environment where, like we said, we have opportunity to work so hard, and especially like today in our economy, we have people working 3 jobs because one job just won't cut it. And that can be very isolating. And I guess those are the things that could be a trigger, to bring to the surface the sort of the different kinds of traumas that we could have experienced. So even as we go into the next part of our discussion, which is effects of unresolved trauma, which is like addictions, mental mood disorders, and implications on our mental health. But I'm really keen on understanding the intersection between people staying in toxic relationships as a result of childhood trauma. Is any one of you willing to take that question?
Because I was just thinking about that previous question that we were talking about. Is you've grown up here, what are some of the experiences that you made sense of in terms of being in this country?
It's a big one. It's a very big one. So we came to Australia when I was 9 with my family, my parents and my 2 brothers. And this was around 2001, and there were very, very few Black people. Like, you literally stop people in the street and be like, hi, because there just was no one here. And of course, as a child, I think, and I think I'll caveat what I'm about to say by saying, of course, this has been my experience, and it's such a complicated experience because it's that interplay between what your parents are going through, bringing you to this very foreign place with no support, no idea what they're going to find, how they're going to get through it. They're dealing with their own internal conflict, and how are they going to be then able to support you as you're navigating this space? You're not quite, you're not quite a child, you're not quite an adult. You're trying to make sense of it yourself, and it was hard. And I think my, of course, props, they're here in the audience, I have to say nice things about them. No, they did really well, because I think what, as an adult, I've come to see is that, and I guess I'm not a parent myself, so another caveat, but I think the panel members might agree with me. You guys were probably parented very, very differently to how maybe someone like Emsu, who's a newish parent, would be parenting her kids now. And I think when my parents were coming to Australia, what I've come to maybe understand, and I hope I'm not being crass, but I think the Kenyan context was very much, are you fed? Are you clothed? Do you have shelter? You're good, right? But then you come here and there's this added component of emotional validation, right? And that's not necessarily something my parents may have experienced from their parents. So how are you gonna then impart something onto your kids that you have no idea how to do? You don't know what that looks like. You don't know when you're doing a good job or a bad job. And as a kid myself, I mean, I'm still at that place emotionally that I may not know what I'm getting and not getting, if that makes sense. So, and then there's, as you guys have added, there's the cultural context. I've come here, I'm a young Black female, I don't have any sort of role models in that space going through teenagehood. Silly things like there were no makeup shades for my skin shade, so I'd have to buy super pale makeup, and I'm there and I'm like, why doesn't it look like why don't I look like her? Like, why is this just not computing? And then my mom has no context, because mom doesn't wear makeup, so she doesn't even know where to start helping me. So, it's a blind leading the blind. And so it was a really hard, it was a hard time, but it's a hard time retrospectively, because it's only when you look back and you think, oh my God, that was really hard. And I think that's what, it comes back to that validation. So I think, and I guess I say that to say, there's a few of us, eventually maybe by 2005, there was quite a few families and all the similar ages. So we really developed a nice little peer group. And of course, now we're much older, some of us have kids, and we always sit down and kind of reminisce about the good times, but of course there'll also be the bad times. And I think for a lot of them, what's come up is that there were certain experiences they found traumatic, that maybe their parents didn't perceive as trauma, because there's a lot of desensitization, I would argue, because their parents probably went through the same thing, and they're like, see, I turned out okay. What are you complaining about, right? But that's the thing, right? There's also the stuff that they're navigating, and I guess, and again, it just reiterates how much there's such an interplay between the parents' own sort of mental wellness, and then I'm then having to lead you. And if I'm not okay, and I don't know that I'm not okay, I don't even know what you're internalizing from what I'm dealing with. And again, this is why this topic is so broad. So I think what has really come out, I think, is a few of these peers of mine, they were like, I wish sometimes I could sit there, have these chats with my parents, and maybe get some acknowledgement from them that maybe they didn't handle certain situations in my growing up the way they, in a way that was supportive for me, and not out of malice, but purely because they didn't know any better. You can only do what you can do with the knowledge and in the context that you're operating with. But it's not to devalue their role as parents at all. They've done a phenomenal job. I certainly couldn't bring my whole family with no idea how I'm going to make it work, right? So it's just that those two experiences can exist, that I can be so grateful for how you've led me through life, but also I need you to acknowledge that there are some things that didn't go quite the way that they should have. And again, it's about, validating those traumatic experiences. I may not have perceived them as traumatic, but obviously it really had a detrimental effect on you. And I respect that, and I acknowledge my role in that, and how can we move forward? So I guess, it's really important for us to really understand, the cultural context. And I think I can't remember who said it, but yeah, it's affording each other grace. Like there's a grace I have to afford my parents. You know, if I can sit them and mark them, you know, out of 10, but because you know, if I want to be a parent, my kids will probably sit back and do the same to me, and I'd hope that they would afford me the same grace too. So, yeah.
That was amazing. That was really good. Because I think it's a really good perspective to have, and that's why I was also mentioning so the grace and also that sense of repair within relationships, because conflict and you wronging the other person, that is normal. That is going to happen every single day. But we learn as children, as even adults, we learn how to repair and to be in relationships by those things being modeled to us on a day-to-day basis. So when we call it in trauma work, we call it when there's a rupture, where, you know, a parent hasn't either, you know, followed through on something, acknowledging that and being like, I'm so sorry we didn't do this. I'm so sorry, you know, for whatever. Just to acknowledge it and to show and model that repair. That's really helpful, I guess, for how we deal in relationships on our own. And I'll go back to MC's question about this tendency for, if I get wrong, just correct me. So is it you asked about just, I guess, dysfunctional relationships and why people stay in not very healthy relationships? Is that right? In the context of that within trauma. So similar to Calvin, I'm within the child protection system, and a lot of things that we see, and I think I also mentioned something within the child protection system, the cases that get the attention of the Department for Child Protection are those cases that you're at the end of the road. So many things, so many wrong things have happened to get the attention of child protection. So by the time cases come to the attention of the child protection system, lots of things have gone wrong. So it's not that, and again, it's on a spectrum. Trauma is on a spectrum. So it's possible that sometimes I deal with cases whereby there has been physical assault, severe physical assault, or sexual assault and severe neglect. So before that gets to us, so many little things have happened to a child, have happened with the parents, maybe, you know, not being able to repair or heal themselves to be able to not get the point where they've gotten, whereby DCP or, you know, CPS are getting involved. And in the context of relationships, because we exist in that context very, very, very much, very strongly, within our relationships with maybe an intimate partner, you know, obviously with children, as I was saying earlier, giving the whole context of if a person has grown up in this very chaotic environment since neutral or even just within childhood, wherever, and you are exposed to a very chaotic relationship with your parents or other people around you, a lot of relationship, interpersonal violence, abuse, whether that's physical violence or even emotional violence, abuse of whatever kind, whether it's, you know, adults around you putting each other down, not just saying really terrible things to each other, not being very nice to each other. That's tough. You take on that stuff. So as I said again, you know, the implicit, how we take on information and sensory information, that gets imprinted in our own template of how we're going to be in relationships. So if you had maybe a father who was very abusive, whether it's physically, emotionally, it's likely that if you never make sense of those experiences of childhood in the way that they were physically or emotionally abusive, it's likely that you're going to look for something similar when you're an adult and you're trying to be in a relationship. Very, very subconsciously, you'll be in a very toxic relationship, not really understanding, how did I get here? Or even never even getting there. You're just taking it. Because also everyone in your family or your aunties are in very abusive relationship with your uncles. Or your friends are the same. You have just to stick it through this relationship. You have kids together. Then also forgetting that if this relationship is not working and if your relationship is violent within the home, you're doing more harm to this child than good. So the lack of recognizing, stopping and pausing and being like, what are we doing? What kind of relationship is this? Where do I get the idea that someone has to speak down on me and that's okay? Where do I get the idea that I'm gonna be feeling unsafe, physiologically feeling unsafe within my own home and that's okay? Where did you get that messaging from? You possibly got it from home. You possibly got it from, seeing people around you interacting the same way. Because home is supposed to be home. Home is supposed to be warm and safe. And so if you're having a different experience and then you're bringing children into the world within that experience and just moving on with life as, I guess this is what we do. No, it's not. It's not normal. It's not how everyone does relationships. And we need a different narrative. So unpacking that, stopping to unpack, actually, is this the type of life I want to live? If it's the type of life you want to live, go for it. But if it's not, but then of course, if it goes on too long, DCP are going to be involved, then that's going to be a whole different story. So again, it's just about stopping to think why we keep, I guess, entertaining really poor behaviors from other people and why we don't demand better. What is it about our self-worth, our self-identity? What's that schema, like Mary mentioned? What are the core beliefs that we have? What are the messages that we got from our own childhood about relationships that gets us stuck in a situation with a person who is threatening, intimidating, who puts us down, who doesn't support us? Why are we accepting that? And is that what we want to teach our children? So just things to do.
Can I just add one thing? Very valid and fantastic comments. And again, all this sits in culture, which is a very difficult part of the conversation, I think, because in our culture, and again, all the views you've said are very excellent and put us forward. And it's sort of a step of growth for us as a community. Traditionally, there's been, the gender bias and the religious overlay and the societal expectations. I think that also is a big part of it, where people teach the girls and women, this is what women do. You're the maker of the home. Everything depends on you. Just hang in there and see how it goes. That's toxic message. You might not realize. And to verbalize this is also what people would say. Are you anti-families? Are you suggesting people to break up this like this? But it's all about creating healthy models for them in community. So it's a very difficult area to navigate because it can be quite subjective. You can be seen as anti-family. It's an interesting, tricky one.
Just to add to that, we are a people who live under a lot of taboos. We don't speak ill of the dead. We don't speak about our family. We don't wash our dirty linen in public. So that messaging is very, very deep. But the other thing is this: we are born wired to be cared for by the people. We are actually the most helpless. A giraffe, you have a baby giraffe. The baby giraffe in 10 minutes will be following the mom, and they will go survive. We are helpless for a very long time. Those first carers of ours, what they do is imprinted. We normalize. You can be, I always think of the boy who was raised by a wolf. If you can be raised by a wolf and become like a wolf, what happens is that you actually take on what is in your environment. And that's why you might stay in a toxic relationship, is because you don't know any better, because your sense of self is so fractured. And you cannot believe that you can make that change. And that is why therapeutic, I think Calvin said it's really good, Mary, that there are therapeutic things that can help you to actually look at those things and move forward. I don't think that I'm lying to say that even when you're removing children, in the worst of circumstances, where do they want to go? Back home. They want to go back home. So let us make our homes safe.
Yeah, just I think there's a spirit going on this way. And I think we are we are creatures of habit, whereby if you are used to seeing violence, you want to go back to that. You attract violent people. It's a familiar ground. And what I really wanted to say is to challenge us as a community. We're very blessed to be in this country, in the sense that there's supports. The only issue with our communities, and I just mean the migrant communities, is I guess our challenge is to access those services. I know some of those services are not culturally appropriate. Some of them are trying, they're nearly getting there. But if we don't try and utilize those services, we form our own social groups who are not very equipped. And so they reinforce the culture, they reinforce the religion aspect of it, they reinforce all these things. So we are not actually different from how we function. But then when we access these services, our data is taken. They say, okay, there are 5 Kenyans, there's a trend here. And they will actually, that data, because in this country or any other country, there's no change if there's no data back, if there's no evidence to say that I think there's a need here. So even to think about culturally appropriate services, they say they don't even access services anyway. So I think that is one of the challenges that we've got. We don't sit, instead we go back to what we know, and it's reinforcing what we have. It's not bad actually, let me just say that. But then if it's really, if it's an issue that needs therapeutic intervention, then we will miss, particularly for our children, because with young children, the earlier the intervention, the better the outcomes, because of what we talked about. So I think that's just one thing for people to seek support. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to add on that, I think when it comes to relationship, it's something that really is fascinating. Recently, I had the privilege of talking to this young man. The lucky about some issues and we have talked from a perspective of good safety this whole environment. One thing that she said that stood out for me, that's in relation to relationship. She told me, Calvin, if this is what marriage is all about, then I'll never. Because of the experiences, what you're seeing within the room. And that didn't take long. And we were talking to this South Sudanese boy, he's about 17, very tall. Same issues happening within the family. And he told me and my colleague that if dad keep doing what he's doing in the home, I'll take him in. So we can think about how, we say that the kids are a product of the environment, and we have to be extremely careful, whereby, sometimes when we talk about the good old kiboko, when we use kiboko on the children and kids go to school, and then you hear the report from the school that your child is actually learned this behavior of being violent for the children at school. So it also invites a conversation when we have teenage children on how we're going to think about this childhood trauma and the impact this is going to have on their own relationships going forward. So it becomes absolutely critical that we think about it.
Wow, that's a lot to take in, but I can also see how childhood trauma then translates into intergenerational trauma, because what you see at home is then what you seem to be attracted to and run to. Because sometimes you see people in very toxic relationships and you wonder, why can't you just see, that this is not the right relationship for you? But then now I understand it's because it's what they grew up seeing that they get attracted to, and they don't know how to get out of it. So thank you very much for covering that. Also now we're going to go and look at the interplay between trauma and addictions, different types of addictions.
I don't know who from the panel wants to take on that. And maybe we can, just in the interest of time, maybe we can look at the interplay between addictions, mood disorders, and implications on mental health as we do that. Yeah.
I guess in the relation to the comment between the trauma, association with trauma and addictions, a lot of research has been done in this area, and there's a very high correlation. I think Calvin was mentioning a notion called adverse childhood events. There's lots of studies that have been done. I can't remember when the first ones were, I could be wrong, but I think it was in the 60s, just looking at the cumulative adverse events that people might go through. And this would include all the things that have already been mentioned: exposure to domestic violence, things like displacement, physical abuse, neglect, drug abuse within the home, alcoholism within the home is a very big one. And all these are very predictive of chronic lifelong health issues, chronic lifelong addictions, higher incidence of mental health disorders, and this is across a lifespan from, I guess, technically infancy up until the 60s, 70s for the individual. So certainly high correlation, and all these areas are very much interconnected. And again, going back to the concept that Susan brought up with the coping mechanisms, for some people, it's just the way to suppress all the emotions and just keep powering through, because that is what's going to help you stay in that survival mode and just keep going from the next moment to the next moment. Not effective, but it has its place. And you can see how the two kind of move, especially if you're caught up in a cycle that's sort of unchanging, from which there's not much assistance, not within the context of support relationships that can act as a buffer.
I think absolutely right. But I was just going to add, I guess it'd be interesting to think about the physiological context of some of these things that we're addicted to. So I'll use alcohol as an example because alcohol is obviously very prevalent in our community. And I'll certainly again caveat this by saying that alcohol in and of itself is not a bad thing, but you have to look at why you're using alcohol to deal with what you're dealing with. And I guess I raise this to raise the fact that when you're consuming alcohol, there's kind of certain stages of how you feel when you're drinking the alcohol. So let's say, I'm in a really anxious environment, and the first glass or two of wine really calms me down, right? And then you get to that place where you're feeling good, you're feeling free, it's a social lubricant, the social anxiety that you might sometimes face talking to people goes away, and you love how you feel when you're on the alcohol. But then that's also when your brain starts to forget, I've actually had quite a bit now. So what do? You keep drinking and drinking and drinking, then you get to the stupor, you pass out. The problem is alcohol is also a depressant. So what do? When you wake up the next morning, you're actually a lot lower than you were when you began. Or you remember, hey, but when I drink, actually it makes me feel good. So what do? You start the cycle again. And it just continues and continues and continues. And what we know about the body, it's very adaptive. So over time, alcohol in and of itself is sort of like a poison. So your body is kind of coming up with ways to get rid of the alcohol as a toxin quickly. So the same alcohol quantity you would have needed to start this process gets more and more and more and more and more. And we know that alcohol not only has cognitive effects, it has, it affects your liver, it affects basically everything. So I think it is really important for us as a community to start to think about, the actual the things that we're using and how they're actually specifically harming us. And also going back to that imprinting, if a child has grown up in an environment where alcohol is used very loosely, they start to relate that as everybody does this and this is how we deal with our problems. So why wouldn't I do this? So I think it's really important for us as a community. I'm not saying alcohol is bad, like I said, but I think to really observe the alcohol-related behaviors, because that's one of the most common things people use to self-medicate.
Maybe we should just also relink that to the domestic violence and other traumas within the home. I guess when that alcohol is on board is when people are being more physically aggressive, there's more arguments, there's higher risk to the children of abuse, neglect.
I think from the social context, I really want to talk about what Lisa said. what it is that there's a lot of research out there that tells us, unfortunately, because of the cultural background where we come from, we don't tolerate alcohol very well compared to maybe mainstream Australians, for example. So our bodies don't break it down the way theirs break down. So usually when somebody was born here or in Australia, for example, when they take 3 beers, it's advisable for us to maybe take one because we don't break it down like them. So we are more affected than them. Then also there's alcohol syndrome, particularly for childbearing groups. So we begin having children who are abnormal because they've been affected by alcohol. So it's something to think about. There's a reason why these pregnant women, for example, are banned from either drinking or taking drugs. Then the other thing is also about drugs, because we don't really understand. So we get into it, and we'll find that, unfortunately, our communities have actually, especially our young people, have gotten into that because they don't understand. And they don't understand how it impacts on them. And so they get affected 3 times. The history of Aboriginal, for those people, because I studied Aboriginal studies, what it is they used alcohol and drugs like cigarettes to colonize them. So they used to be gatherers and hunters. They used to go and get their food, but they were introduced to, certain foods, sugars, alcohol, cigarettes. And so that was actually a way of making, because they already knew they cannot break it down. So they got addicted, and that's how it was very easy to colonize them and suppress them. So even for us, we need to be very careful that our bodies cannot break it down the way everybody else in the mainstream society does.
And I think with that also there's another area of intersectionality that we're not really talking about much. And this comes to religion and how religion plays a role in terms of how we're dealing with childhood trauma. This is not my area of expertise, and probably I would invite any of the panelists to not really talk about this, because I've come across so many cases involving families who are from a cold background, migrant families, and we all know that whether we are Christians, whether we are Buddhists, whether we are from Islamic faith, religion plays a critical role in terms of our identity, who we are, how we cope with situation. But I have come across situations whereby, unfortunately, this has really, what I would say, let me use this word, has really clouded an opportunity for us to engage other therapeutic supports and intervention. So this becomes absolutely critical that we talk about.
Addiction bit, just I had a couple of thoughts as everyone else has said about addiction, alcohol, things like fetal alcohol syndrome. That's very common. So if you cases like that, of course, though it has become involved. That's not pleasant at all. But then also, you've already caused so much harm to your child. That besides the point, there is also a sense, I guess, to add to what everyone has said, within our culture, there's a sense that alcohol and drugs, these are things that have really been glorified in our cultures in a way that it's really unhealthy. And growing up from Kenya, I went to uni in Kenya, high school and uni in Kenya. The way to socialize is through drinking. The way to, I guess, look like you're part of the group, the cool kids, is by drinking and using drugs. You know what? It's not that cool anymore. In 2024, if you just, that's not cool anymore, because there's so much information now cause that, that all of that situation causes you in your life. And I don't even have a glass of wine from time to time. I love a beer. But just, I guess the history of alcohol, we used it for celebrations. That's all it is. But we have really, really, within our culture, we glorified it so much, and it's caused us so much pain. Throughout our childhood, we're passing it on to the new generation. And how helpful is that? Maybe thinking about it in that way, it's not, but just something to think about. It's just alcohol. We don't need to glorify it. So let's just enjoy a one and just move on the next day or whatever. The other thing was about addictions within families. Addiction is really, I guess, and the impact of that on families. Addiction obviously it's a disease. You need to be even more medicated for that. Yeah. So when your alcohol dependence and drug dependence is getting to the point where you being hospitalized and your life is basically falling apart, just trying to hold on. And also, if your alcohol consumption is affecting various areas of your life, your family life, your work, how you are with friendships, and that's when you realize maybe there's a problem here. And if you find yourself denying, if that's brought up to you by someone who loves you, and you're denying it or you're hiding it, you're at a point where you probably need to take that seriously, because you get to the point of you're an addict. You probably need to be medicated. You need professional help for that. So then also thinking about the impact of that within the family set, things that how your alcohols may affect children, may affect your parents, may affect your friendships around you. That is one thing that can be very shameful. There's a lot of shame around that, and we really need to be, I guess, kind when we're approaching issues, because your family love you, your friends love you, but at the end of the day, we also need to be honest with the person, so that we are not enabling. Yeah, we're not enabling that behavior that is so toxic for yourself and other people around you. So I just needed to bring that out, and how we support each other and families with that. Maybe think about it, and also, I guess, even acknowledging other people looking outside, acknowledging that these are really sensitive issues for a family, and realizing that people probably need support. People probably need to talk about these things in a confidential manner, in a supportive manner, not just pointing fingers at, they go from it's so bad. That's not helpful. But if we can be as supportive as possible, manage and navigate addictions, that'll be much more productive with this.
Thank you so much. How are we doing on time? Is it almost after the break? We're good with the time? Okay. So the only few comments I would make about the intersection, I suppose, religion and culture. What I find interesting to me is that those two aspects simultaneously do us good and harm at the same time. Because, for example, well, let me back up one step. So trauma happens in a context. And usually you have a religious or cultural context that defined when anything is happening, it's within a certain context. So we find strength as people in our culture. We identify a certain way. The practices we do, if you think culture is your way of life, your language, your history, the things you do around your house, you culture dictates a lot of those things. But then there's also religion, and then good or bad, we as a people, when I say we, I'm speaking for people who come from Africa, primarily in this context, we have both of those, and we hold to them very strongly at the same time. It's an identity that it's so intertwined, you cannot separate. And so the challenge is, and I've had this conversation with Calvin and Rachel as well, and also Dr. Gateri last week, is religion gives us strength. Religion gives us community. So we're meeting in a religious building. I don't know where else we could have been today, maybe a community hall or a sports ground or someplace. But religious places give us a sense of community, togetherness. In fact, we use the language of brother and sister in the religious circles, right? The challenge with religion, especially 3 or 4 major religions, is that they have scriptures. And having scriptures, so you think of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, well, they have scriptures. Scriptures give you instructions and a way to live your life. And so sometimes the dictate of religion or the commandments tell us to do one thing, and we follow, quote unquote, blindly because we want to please the gods, right? So if you're a Christian, you're trying to live a certain way, and then there's at times conflicts between how we should live our lives and how we interpret the scriptures. So Calvin goes to somebody's house, and there's chaos in this house because the child is struggling, and they find that there are religious roots for the problem because the parents want the child to toe the line by following the dictates of the scriptures given religion. And maybe the child doesn't want to. Becomes a problem because you're not going to live in my house if you don't go to church on Sunday. If you don't dress a certain way, you're not going to use that language in my house. Not because our book tells us you shall not use that language here. You shall not hang out with those kids because the book says. And we hold on to that strongly. So the book that is supposed to give us strength, and it is giving us strength, sometimes becomes a problem. And then where are the problems? Of course, we lean to the authority of what the book says. For those that are really religious, deeply religious people, the book trumps everything else. Some people will go against the law because they say, I'd rather die. And it's not something they've made up, it's the allegiance that the book demands. I'll give you an example. Christianity. Peter and Paul in the first century Christianity. Then in the book of Acts, if you've read it, if you haven't, welcome to a Bible study. So they're preaching about Jesus is resurrected, and they're going around the city and telling people, oh, believe in Jesus Christ and change your ways. And people are mad at them, and they want to arrest them. And what does Peter and Paul say? He says, man, we can't help it but obey God. Because they're saying we'd rather obey God than obey. Actually, that's the language they use. They say we'd rather obey God than man, which means they're willing to die for what they believe, right? Look at the other religion, Islam, for example. 9/11 in the US of A. They just knew, we've been told. So airplane pilots, they go to school, they train, they're given a mission. They're not listening to anything else. It is said we shall go and do a certain act. So they fly the planes into the Twin Towers and all the other places. Point I'm making is that religion and meaning faith is very strong. And sometimes there's going to be a conflict and we don't know which way to lean. Because the Bible says, oh, spare the rod and spoil the child. Oh, yeah, doesn't it say that? And we say that, and we say, hey, I am hating you because I what? I love you. And there's a cartoon back then, and the kid says, man, I wish I was old enough to return my love. But those are the challenges we're facing. And then the same way with culture. You know, this week I was reading stuff on Africa for the UN. The UN, they've done research in Africa. If you go and Google trauma in sub-Saharan Africa, you're going crazy. The things that we do in our culture that are normal practices. You're going, what? I was looking at them, I'm like, am I from Africa? Is that where it came from? Because it's right now repulsive to me, but it's the norm. It's just what people do. And people accept those things. Why? So Calvin goes there to some people's house. Is told, oh, there's this Kenyan family who he drives there, comes to Flagstaff. He opens. I tell him, Calvin, you know this is our culture. And he has nowhere else to go. He can go to the law and tell me all of these things. But when I tell them, we know this is our culture, he understands exactly what I mean. Exactly what I tell him, man, this. We start a meeting like this, we are late. I say, Calvin, man, how are we doing on time? He says, it gives you a high five today. He goes, oh, Peter, it's our culture. Yeah, that's what he did. But this is strong. And so when it comes to the issues of trauma, you find that things that we tend to accept because culture, faith seems to override that part of our brain that calls us to behave in a certain way, to have maybe common sense, I don't know, but it's so deeply rooted. And the last point I'd like to make, and I've seen this to Calvin, the challenge here is we don't want to be so quick to judge. So if Calvin comes to my house and is saying, hey, we've had complaints, hey, man, we need to have a chat, he shouldn't be too quick to say, you forget your culture. Because when I forget my cultures, there's a tendency to throw the baby with the bathwater out. Because that culture has so many good things in it. That same culture that's making me do those bad things has a lot of things that are so good. Even that faith, it makes me maybe an upright, moral person is the thing that makes me think twice. I'm not going to lie. Okay, I'm not going to lie to you. And you appreciate because I'm not lying to you. So if it comes to me and challenges and says, oh, your faith is irrational, get rid of it, I might throw everything out. And then again, you go to a place and say, no, Peter, come back. Take some of the good, cherry pick things. But those are the challenges I think we find in the context of trauma and childhood traumas. And do I have the answers? No, I do not. But I raise them as questions and things that we, all of us, we have the duty and the responsibility as we follow whatever the dictates we choose to follow, whether it's Christianity, Islam, whatever it is, any culture as well. Let's begin to look at some practices and go like, that one, I'm going to leave that one aside. That's not for me. And then the good things, you'll be like, yeah, it is lovely brothers. Together in unity, I'll be like, yeah, of course, I'm going to do that. It's a good thing. And that invites you to have that critical mind to look at that group. Don't get me started on that. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer. I like this. It's very enlightening. And so far, we've been able to define what trauma is and have a general overview of what different types of trauma exist and what childhood trauma is. We've also looked at the symptoms of trauma and coping mechanisms of trauma and the effects of unresolved trauma, where we've seen the interplay of trauma between relationships, addictions, mood disorders, implications on mental health, and as Calvin has brought out, religion, which is quite a sensitive topic to talk about, religion and culture. And I like what you've said, you cannot separate someone from their culture because then you take away their identity. But I guess it's having these conversations and sensitizing ourselves on, what the effects of trauma and how we can still uphold our culture, but still heal from the trauma, that we stop this intergenerational passing down of trauma to our children and their children's children. Now, the next thing that we're supposed to look at is the hope. We know that there's hope for healing. And I think we'll all run to saying there's resources. There's this very many things that you can look at. I remember when I came to Australia, in the introduction session that we had, we were told if you have any problems, there's a school counselor. If you need any support, this is where you go to. When you go to work nowadays, there's EAP. There's all these fingers pointing you to the right direction. So I know that's not really new, but I think I want us to look at it differently. Why is it that with us people, even with the knowledge of the existence of these supports, and I'm not downplaying these supports in any way, I think they're very, very, very important and they're good places for us to run to. Why is it that we still struggle to reach out to these supports? Why is it that we run to alcohol? Why is it that we still hold on to very toxic relationships? Why is it that we still stay in a place where we don't acknowledge? Because I think that's I think suffering trauma is, it's sad. It's sad that anyone would grow in a home or in an environment where they're not safe, they're not being loved and all that. But I think it's even sadder if you can't realize that you are experiencing trauma and that you need help. Does that make sense? So I think most of us could be traumatized, could be experiencing the effects of trauma, but we haven't conceptualized that we need help. And I think that's what I want us to address, because then I think we're going to reach and connect more to people, because it's only at that point where you have that understanding and, actually identify, actually need help, that then you can reach these supports. Does anyone want to take that question?
Thank you. I think some of the reasons why we don't reach out and we have alternatives that may not be very helpful, it's multifaceted. So one of the issues is it could be systemic. So some of these services are not accessible to us in terms of you go there and nobody really gets you. In terms of racism in the system in service provision, in terms of even just the setup of everything and the way counseling happens, because we are so used to informal counseling, but the formal counseling is a very Western concept. So that is systemic. Then there's also sociocultural, whereby we deal with things. We don't go and seek help. We don't tell people our stuff. So that is really ingrained in us. It's things that it's our discourses that we maintain. And then, and part of that is also even lack of knowledge about what happens. So it's the fear of, I go there, I sit in front of a woman or a social worker male, and telling them these things, So that is part of the social cultural. Then there's also the economic part of it. Sometimes getting time to seek these services is time consuming. You've got a shift to go to. You've got work to go. You've got to go to school because that's your visa requirement. So there's a lot, it's multifaceted, like we said. And also the fear of unknown. What if I went there and nothing happens? What will I do? So that's just really my contribution in that.
Wasn't going to contribute. Yes, but I do think that we stand a lot in our own way. First of all, because we don't discuss emotions, as somebody had said earlier, and it's a very hard conversation for us to start having. And we prefer actually to have that informal counseling within our friendship circles. And I think if that serves you well, by all means, please always keep a good friend that you can talk to about your traumas, because you don't always have to have a formal counseling session. As long as you have somebody that you can honestly go and say something to them, just to link into faith. It says when you confess things, then the healing comes. And sin, as they say, is actually missing a mark, isn't it? It's an archery term, is that you miss the mark. And when you realize you've missed the mark, well, you go and you practice your archery, and there is grace for your healing. I also think that, I guess as an African people, in this diaspora space, I think there's a lot of us talking, thinking about having services that are good for our people, but our people also don't trust services. So there's also that a bit of a roundabout sort of thing. So I guess it's also starting to break down those things. And I think it's so encouraging, Grace, to hear you here and to see you here. I have a lot of faith for my kids and everything, just seeing you, because I think you're the generation that can actually turn things around. You're the ones who can start to have that conversation and say, hey guys, we've come to this place. This is our experience, let's help one another. So yeah, keep going.
That was such a good point, because a few good points there. I'm just thinking as a talk. In regards to, yes, you don't have to go to a formal service to achieve healing or recovery. Another big thing about trauma-informed work is that there's a lot of emphasis on relationships. So because childhood trauma happens within a relationship, it has to be healed within a relationship, in the sense that, yes, maybe your parents and people who cared for you didn't provide you the emotional, you have lots of unmet emotional needs, you can get that in another safe, healthy emotional relationship. Then also, I guess the reason why, I guess the people or the group of friendships that you have also need to have the capacity to be able to hold space for you, for that healing to happen. Because also, again, as Mary was saying, you don't want to be in a group of friendships that reinforces the really unhelpful, unsafe things, and just, just getting on with what you're used to. Because there's also a sense of, something new is frightening, and that also affects your amygdala, that part of the brain that is so scared of, that affects how you respond. So just being able to identify that the relationships you're in are safe and actually reinforce healthy ways of being, that can be very healing, and that they have the capacity to hold you. And obviously there's also resources online that you can go to, you can read books of people who are doing this work. I find it very interesting how Susan said that people don't trust our services. And I guess I would like to really unpack that. What is it about also that, if an African person has a counseling or therapy service, you'd rather go to other people than this person? That's very interesting in on itself, because it says a lot about how we perceive ourselves as a people. The fact that what is it in this context, in the space, in the society that you live in, that has given you that message, which is a lot of the colonialism and racism, they do reinforce that. But how, as an individual, of course, you're taking that in and really being very dismissive of, I guess, your fellow, Africans who might be very helpful as well. So that would be interesting to unpack. Another thing is our help-seeking behaviors. I think someone mentioned that, Calvin or Mary. We, in our context, before I came to this country, I went for help from my parents. I went for help from my uncles and aunties. I never went to a service for help. So it's a very different society, and I guess what we call help-seeking behaviors. If we are not familiar with these, you seek help from services, counseling services, things like that. If you're not exposed to that back home, that's going to be a very foreign concept. But at the end of the day, this is the society we are in, and we need to, I guess, get comfortable with that. But then also be careful not to go to a service that is, I guess, trying to. I'm thinking about a story that Peter told us about going to a counseling session, being told, you're happy for me to share that. Too late, confidentiality out the window, sorry guys. But you want to be in a service that is not asking you to get parts of yourself. And I guess the last thing I'm gonna say is there's space in an individual, there's space for lots of us to exist. There is our spirituality that comes possibly from our religion. There is neurobiology, so our brain, our nervous system, our body, all of that plays a role. Whether it's us socially, how we are culturally, there's space for all of that. And don't ever let anyone tell you that or undermine your culture. The demands you have, we all, I'm pretty sure everyone has been asked for money from home. That is a part of what happens. It's what we call black tax. So if if you're going through spaces where that is invalidated, yes, we're trying to manage and help and support our families where we can. We need to be able to navigate those spaces and catch things and family things that we have to do. If you're trying to work hard to get your family here, there is room for all of that because we are also strong and resilient people. There is a lot of space for it. There's space for you to care for your mental health. There's a space for you to care for your spiritual health, your body, your physiological. All of that can exist in one place in a very balanced way. It's an everyday challenge, but it's who we are, and don't feel like one thing is less than another. That's just the complexity of being human.
I think I might just bring us back to the original concept of stigma. Thank you for your points, all very good. And I think the stigma aspect plays a very big role. Maybe stigma and denial both go together, where a lot of us are maybe conditioned to think mental health issues affect them not me, which is sad, but that's, I guess, a perception that people have. And this reminds me of one of my clients in the early days had a breakdown, and in the treatment was being driven to one of the best treatment centers at Glenside, and they saw this big sign that mental, and just that was a complete, and it's kind of the imprint that you got into this system. So just that rejection again of the word, the mental, but maybe if we again start to normalize. There's professions for everything. You lose both when you see it. You need some education, you've got the teachers, you need your tax, you need a professional for your body health, and the mental health should be this. Sometimes you need an additional level of expertise. And I remember saying there's some things that are beyond the realm of our spiritual counselors, and even they go, listen to that and to the limit that it can. And now you need to see, a counselor or a social worker or whatever other, psychologist or psychiatrist. And we're all working together to improve our wellness. So maybe let's not be so scared of the mind, because again, our minds and our spirit and our soul all interconnected. There's nothing weird or seeking assistance. And maybe if the more we talk about these things, we're hoping conversations and forums that it will be seen as we're looking after you. You do all the things that keep you there. I think in session 1, John King gave a thing. Each one of us should have some kind of toolbox that you go to. If you're stressed, you know what works for you. Ring up your mates, go for a hike, meet up at I've only one, as we've been advised. If you're a lady, meet up with a girl, go do some beauty stuff, that's helpful. Have a play with all the kids, and have a toolbox. Come to church and have a sense of community and speak to the spiritual counselors. If there's that next level of expertise, and seek very important.
The only thing I would think I was going to add to that is, well, I think the value of informal peer group discussions is really, really important because, how many times have you had a situation where you think, oh my God, I'm the only person in the world who's ever gone through this. And then you mention it to someone, and no, we all go through this. And it's such a nice experience not to feel so isolated. But I think there reaches a point, like you rightfully said, where it's even beyond your friends. And I think what's really important about professional counseling that's culturally sensitive is that this person, like Mary was talking about, is actually trauma informed. And I think when you're bringing up a lot of these traumatic experience, there's a possibility you can re-traumatize yourself. And sometimes you can really burden your friends with really heavy issues that even they get triggered, right? And now you're really not helping each other. So I think when, to implore people to seek professional help, that, once you develop that rapport with your counselor, or, the best thing about this is at the end of that session, when all that stuff has come up, they can then bring you back down and give you tips about self-care and how you're going to go home and decompress from all of this as you work through it and come back. And so that you're not really, I guess, I don't know if you have similar relationships, but there's sometimes, that one friend who's constantly calling and calling and calling, and you see their number and you're just like, oh, I love you, but it's too much. I can't deal with this. And it's hard to say, girl, I think you need professional help. And again, to destigmatize that and say, this isn't a bad thing. This is just the first best thing you've done is recognize there's a problem here, and you're making good steps towards getting better. Yeah.
Thank you. I just did wanted to comment briefly on the denial aspect of it. I think Dr. Angela briefly touched on that, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. That was a very robust discussion around how we seek for help. I like something you said, Grace, because it's actually good to acknowledge as an individual on the receiving end, if you have someone who's always coming to you, to actually say, you know what, I can only take it this much, because you don't want to traumatize the person that you're going to. And I guess it's, I like this conversation. I'm just going to reiterate that it's important for us as a community to keep having these conversations to destigmatize trauma and any issues related to mental health, so that we keep pointing towards the right support. We have talked about everything, and I think the bottom line, it's not all bad, that there's still capacity for us to find help and for people to heal and for people to operate at optimum once they find those supports. I'm just going to let us know that Sharon, one of the social workers who is present, has brought with her some materials that have different kind of supports that you can reach out to. And I'm trying to see. Oh, she's just left, but she's left the material at the back. Yes, so I know we are a bit tired and we want to have a bit of a break, but before we go on break, we had a very nice gentleman who was kind enough to share something with us last time, and he's here with us today with something as well. So I'm going to invite Luke, and then after that we're going to have a short break, and then after that we'll come back in for the Q&A. So please bear with us, but let's clap for Luke even as he comes on stage.
Thank you everyone for all your talks. So interesting. I'm sitting there thinking, stop talking about me with all this trauma, geez. So I've been on a journey with it. So my name is Luke Baker. I'm a spoken word poet, and I'd just like to offer poetry and welcome you to creative aspects, and feel free to connect with me. You can talk to me after, and yeah, I welcome you into that sort of community. There's a community that holds an open mic poetry event the last Sunday of every month. It's called Soul Lounge, and it's very welcoming. You can speak your piece, and I'd just like to share a couple of poems with you that kind of contrast each other. And the first one is called I Need Poetry, because I need poetry. It helps you release a lot of those stored emotions, or unpack yourself so that you can put yourself back together. And the creative process is very, very important, and I really try to promote that wherever I can. So this is it. It's called I Need Poetry. I need poetry to feel. Without it, I am just an empty shell, bottled up with a tight seal. Sometimes I don't even know what's real, but if I recite a poem in public, then technically I'm not talking to myself. But still, a stranger will avoid me in the street instead of asking if I need any help. Maybe I just need to be held, need to be opened, shucked like an oyster, shelled, taken down like a tree, chopped and felled. I need poetry. To words I am compelled. I need poetry. Let me yell at the top of my lungs, the ones that breathe words, and under my tongue, clever verse. The ones that get blurted out, I flirt with them, I whirl them about. I've been hurt by men that left me wordless again and again. Now I have found it as I return to myself, nurture myself. I pulled me up and stepped out of that hell. I need words that slice through my mind and cut out the noise to leave music in their wake. Metaphors that form thoughts as images that hold me for my sanity's sake. Threads to pull on, unweave the tapestry of my mind, your mind, the hive mind, the divine. Connect me to the history of my species. I will think with you. I assure you I do not mind. Must I explain all my metaphors? Or will you seek the answers yourself? I'm not a vegetarian, but I do eat vegetables. Thank you. And the next one I'd like to share with you is just the last one. It's called Good Things, and it contrasts it by, it's a poem about accepting the good things that come in life and the good things that go. Because good things come and good things go. And I wrote this kind of to myself, as I do a lot of my poetry, to just accept the loss of some good things and be okay with that. That's, we need to learn how to do that. But you are not the first good thing I've had to say goodbye to. And you are not the last. Good things come and good things go. Sometimes slow and sometimes fast. But I keep them buried just beneath the surface of the sands of the past. Rains pouring, all falling through my loose grasp. You are not the first good thing I've had to say goodbye to, and darling, you are not the last. For good things come, and good things go. This is the truth I've come to know. Whether fast or slow, surely in the end, good things come and good things go. It worries me not. It is life's ebb and flow. Each good thing, oh, a soiled seed that will not grow. But not all seeds must bloom into trees. I just keep digging this land that I sow. I am merely a gardener of these good things that will always come and always go. Thank you. And I'll hand you back. Thanks so much. And again, really extending a warm welcome to anyone that wants to connect to me and use poetry as another tool set to help with mental health. I also run workshops, and I'm working on one with moving through our emotions and connecting to ourselves and transforming that into writing and creating beauty out of pain, if you will. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. For those who don't know, we've been looking for Luke's number for quite a while before today, And then today when John and I were sitting here going through the run sheet, we saw him and I was like, "Guy, John, look, he's here. You need to ask him whether he's going to do a presentation." And he didn't even have like a lot of time to prepare. And for him to be able to do that is quite something, isn't it? Please, let's give him a better clap. Thank you. Thank you so much, Luke, for honoring us with your presence and also with the poems. They're amazing to listen to. Like I said earlier, we are going to go on break, but just before we go on break, I'm just going to ask our lovely panels to wave on the camera that's there, because we've got 45 people watching online on Zoom and also on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you are enjoying and learning and absorbing all the richness from the discussion that we are having today. Thank you for bearing with us as well, people on the floor. We are going to take a 15 minutes break, after which we'll come back for the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Of it that we want some guidance. I think the first thing is to thank the panelists. In my perspective, this is as good as it can get. It felt like listening to an international conference or workshop, or the quality of the presentation is so good. It's so enlightening. It's up there. Like the Super League, guys, so keep it up.
It's all about him.
There is one area that Grace touched that I think resonated very well with me, and especially being a migrant parent who
I don't know what he's going to get
my
straight
children
over
from
there.
Kenyan culture and brought them here when they were in their formative initial sort of stages. And you said something that was very noble, that our focus as parents was, provide for the children. There's shelter, there's food, there's blah, blah, blah. I'm taking you to McDonald's. What else do you need? And yet these children now, it's turned out that yes, they were going through experiences in school, in their whatever interaction in the sports arena and blah, blah, blah. Things that we as parents didn't understand, or we didn't even think they were issues.
Oh, that's for childhood trauma thing.
I'm just
listening to it remotely.
Seek some further guidance from you, Grace. On what do you think as elderly parents like myself? I won't talk about your parents because they're not elderly. What do you think we should do to, I guess, face our children and basically say that word you said, I'm sorry for what I did, and da, 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 and especially given that my culture could potentially start that parents don't usually blah 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 apologize to children and da 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 da. What are some of the tools available to manage that very, very important conversation? I think a lot of children, a lot of families are confronting this. It's only that they possibly are not aware. And having listened to you, it's such a topic. Sorry, Grace.
Thank you, and wow, it's a big thing. And I think what I really like is that I hope that the parents of our peers now, who are maybe starting to recognize some of the ways in which maybe they could have done things a little bit better. I think the first thing is the willingness to acknowledge that there may have been some deficiencies. I think, unfortunately, and I don't think it's intentional, there's an innate defensiveness that comes because you truly believe you were doing the best that you could at the time, right? And so when someone comes to you with a grievance that you maybe don't perceive as having, that's not what I meant, that's not why I did that, or why aren't you understanding, I was doing the best that I could to understand how much I sacrificed. Well, those are all very valid statements. Automatically, you come onto the defensive, and the person who had something that they wanted to share with you that's actually kind of very vulnerable and very sensitive for them, their instant reaction is to retract and I'll never broach this with you again. And then there's always going to be that little undercurrent of, you're not a safe person that I could express difficult feelings with. And I think, I guess, and it's hard and it's difficult, and I think what I would say is that everyone will have to see how they can broach this in their own dynamic, because of course everyone's relationships are different. But the first thing I would say is, don't be don't be automatically defensive. Sit there and actually listen, and don't listen with waiting for a response. Sit there and acknowledge, okay, these are the ways this person felt they were affected, and it's not a personal attack. I think that's the other thing, because I think there's an intrinsic sense that why are you challenging me as a person? But we're just talking about the experience that we had, and there are so many factors that the child was not privy to that played into that situation. And I think, again, to hold space for two things being true. I was a parent doing the best that I could at the time, but also things didn't quite go how I wanted them to go. At least the interaction did not go how I wanted to. And those things are both true, and they can exist in the same space. And you apologizing is not maybe acknowledging that you did the wrong thing necessarily, but that it didn't quite go how it was you wanted it to go. And you acknowledge that, and then ask them, like, okay, so from your perspective, how can we move forward? What do you need from me? And then actually actively engage in that process. And if they say, like, I want, whatever the case may be, don't just say, oh, I'm sorry. See, I said I was sorry. Like, that's, and we laugh, but we've all had these experiences, right? And it's so defeating or deflating, because you feel like, have you actually really heard what I've said? So I think apologize, mean it, and then follow it up with some sort of action that shows them that. And I think maybe the other thing to acknowledge, which might be a bit difficult, is that you may never be able to bridge that gap, and that's really hard to face. But it's true, right? But you can always move forward from a certain point. And I think if you work towards that, and the other person is really receptive to the fact that, by the way, they're trying, that might be the best that you can do. But it's.
I think you put it in such a lovely way, Grace, from your lived experience. And what I take from that is maybe some theoretical concepts that will be helpful, the notion of holding that space. So just reflecting together jointly, and maybe an introduction question. What was that like for you? And just truly listening and validate without, without being defensive or shooting the person down, or explaining yourself away in a way that they find is further re-traumatization. So just sitting with and creating that space for them to unburden whatever their thoughts were or their experiences, and elevate a relationship.
It's everything they say. And also, so remember how I said at the beginning that a human being develops from a child, from a fetus to adulthood. So our grandmothers, our fathers, our mothers are still developing as people. There's room for growth throughout development process. So just because you're a parent doesn't mean you don't still get triggered when, say, Grace or another child who's experienced those experiences when they came here. You will still possibly get triggered. You will still experience. You probably feel like this is really unfair. I really tried, and that's okay. But that's when you start to notice, this is triggering me. Why am I getting defensive? Why? And really, it's possible that it goes back to the trauma that you hold as a human being, as a person, as, yes, an adult. But that stuff is so real, we can't pretend it's not there. And that's okay to acknowledge that. But also, and it's not one of those things that you can't just stop or tune off in yourself. You really need to be in tune in how you're feeling to be able, I guess, to address some of these things and to move forward in a way that is meaningful to your relationship with your child. But you have to address, okay, I think I don't know, I'm really struggling to manage the repair in this relationship with my child because I feel like we gave you so much. Why are you not grateful? There is those things that are going to come up, but question that, read on that. There's so many resources. Most of you are very, obviously educated. It's possibly different from people back, parents back in Kenya who, we probably need, however that looks like for each one. But read on it to understand what is this thing. If you need therapy, if you need counseling, there's supports like that that will help you as a person, as a parent, I guess find out why do you still have these things that are so unresolved that continue to affect your relationships with your children. And really, it's about having the emotional skills, because a part of the trauma is it sort of gets us emotionally stunted. You get stunted. You can be an adult, but then emotionally you're very young. And I'm not saying that to offend anyone, but to acknowledge that, it's possible for younger people to have more emotional maturity than older people. And just recognizing that as not a challenge, but a place to grow in oneself, so that we are doing relationships a bit better than we have done in the past and caused so many harm.
I think that question, I really resonate with Dawn, because I also have older children and I've got them up here. What Grace has said, I wish somebody had told me that many years ago. But one of the things that I learned, because I used to manage a youth program called New Laraka, and what I learned through training is a training called Who is in Charge. Because when we moved here, there's intergenerational conflict, where the way we parent is very different from the way we parent. We still bring our practices, how we parent from home, and our children are grown up here. So they actually expect a very different, the expectations are very different. So one of the tips that I would always give is, or what I learned from that training of Who is in Charge, is actually how you apologize. So sometimes we apologize and say, I'm sorry, then call a bus. So, and that does not make any sense for a child who was brought up here. They're very pragmatic here. I'm sorry for doing this and this. So you have to unpack that. And so that's one thing I learned, because even my own children tell me, what, because they're Grace's age, why are you apologizing? Because you haven't actually said anything, you just said sorry. So really making that a bit more, going deeper and saying, I'm really sorry, because, and give explanations. And then the other thing that I wanted to add is also, I think Rachel touched on it, repair, because sometimes we rupture relationships, which is normal, but we really need to be very quick to repair. And that is one thing, particularly the father figures, they really struggle with that, because culturally, how can you apologize to a child in my culture anyway? so those are some of the things that we just need to think about.
Yeah, I won't really dwell much on this, because I think this panel is really touched a lot on the challenge that we face in that space. And one thing I would add that obviously I do agree with Mary, culture plays a big part of how we parent. And when it comes to those issues of emotional intelligence, it becomes even more complicated. Even for myself, I struggle with that. With my son, sometimes I feel like, we come from a patriarchal society where, men are always right, regardless of whether we do things that can be damaging or not. And I think this is things that we are learning, and it's not something that comes very, very natural to us, but we recognize the importance of that. So I think one thing I do normally see a lot also in that space is when we have what I would call absentee fathers in most of these kids' lives. And I think it's probably one of the biggest issue at the moment. Last week I was talking to other people from other departments in relation to the so-called the African gangs that we are seeing in the community. And one thing that came out was that issue of the absentee fathers and how we really, whether it's culturally, or whether it's because of our other commitments, we don't have time to really be able to be present and be role models in this kids' life. But I think these are things that we will continue to learn, especially via forums like this and in men groups or men conferences that we attend. We really, really figure out how we can be present in some of these places and to be able to be attuned to some of those emotional needs in children.
Thank you very much for both the question and the responses from the panel. Do you have any other question from the floor? Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is John. I did ask a question, and I would love to have it answered before I go. When I was growing up, I went through trauma through alcohol. My dad was, thank God, now he's an elder in the church and no longer does alcohol. But he was an addict, and that had a lot of impact on me and my other siblings and my mother. And at the time, I was very young. Now, that, I don't know how to put this, that effect made me hate alcohol with a passion because of the impact that alcohol had on our family and on our future. Now, I did ask a question. I had asked through the QR code. Are there some childhood trauma that have positive outcomes? Because I think for me, going through the alcohol trauma made me become a better person. And I did not follow in my dad's ways. And I know there are many other people who resonate with that. You see something bad, don't borrow from it. So I think the psychiatrist needs to tell me whether is this something, and also what we do to our kids. And I think that is in the line of spare the rod and spoil the child. When we submit them to that trauma, does it have some positive outcomes? Thanks.
I think you're quite right in saying when you say not all trauma is bad, that's not well phrased. From trauma can come hope and resilience, and I think that's exactly what you're saying, that the things that you endured have made you a stronger person, and you wouldn't be who you are today had it not been for those shaping experiences. So that's very much acknowledged in trauma work, that it was terrible what happened and you had no choice, but you have very wisely chosen differently to change and to break the pattern and to actually become strong. Since trauma can shape you in a sort of person.
Add on that, John, again, thank you for sharing that, because I can say that I've come across so many people who come to me really gone the opposite way in terms of how they've been able to really progress or lead a very, very positive life. They've gone through it, and it's amazing how what it's all do. Amazing kids. While on the flip side, you've got others who really can't share this type of trauma in their lives. And I don't know whether there's a physiological aspect to it. I'm not a psychiatrist to do that, but that's normally part of it all the time. Whereby you got one person can really do well, it's got the resilience, and it's actually doing really well. But on the flip side, another person is just
I think there's something to do with also a person's personality, temperament. I think that does play a role, which it sounds like slow and temperament, as well as those experiences of breaking the cycle. So it sounds like you've done that well. Hearing your story, I also wonder through my work with caregivers and children. You mentioned something I found very interesting about you hate alcohol with a passion. It's very strong. I don't want to unpack that here in front of everyone, but I'm trying to find a way to, I guess, talk about this in a bit more sensitive way in that. And it could be something you've considered or something that, whether the impact of that trauma is positive or negative. I guess the really tricky thing about traumas is sometimes they still play a part in our story in ways that come out. You need to be able to resolve the trauma in the sense of, so, because as Grace said earlier, alcohol is not a bad thing. But if you've experienced alcohol to be really terrible because of a family member who had an addiction that really affected your family, that's going to be very tricky. That's going to be something that you hold on to, and you, hence, I guess, I'm wondering whether the comment of I hate it with a passion. I wonder whether there's still some carrying on of that. And I don't want to overstep here, but just carrying on the pain from that. That's why you hate it so much. Because in resolution of trauma, what we want is to address that so that we are not carrying it on to our children in ways that are very unconscious. Because alcohol is just alcohol. But you have a story that can be very, very bad in a family setting. So just wondering whether in how you pass things on within your family, whether that continues to carry on. Because, yeah, do you get what I'm saying? I'm wondering whether, because yes, it's positive right now for you, but it's possible that in the messaging that you give to your children about alcohol, if they want to experiment eventually, how is that going to look like for you? Are we going to tell them that it's really bad, you can't, and you don't condone that? Because then that's going to have rippling effect towards them. Just something to think about. And I'm sorry if I have overstepped.
Thank you for, I'm a bit loud, for both the question and the answer. Thank you so much for unpacking it so beautifully. And I feel like this is an ongoing conversation, which can be done offline or, something that we can address next time. But also, I'm just going through the questions online, and I see one that sort of relates to the question that you've just answered. Can one forget childhood trauma? If not, how should one live with it? The other one, I'm just going to read a couple of questions which I think can be answered together. And can childhood trauma end at a later stage? How can one know that he or she was traumatized when young? Is there a solution to an adult, or is it too late to repair? And how does one know they went through a traumatic childhood experience or growing up, that it was a normal childhood? And I'm also going to request, in the interest of time, if we could limit to the responses of the questions to maybe one or two panelists. I know we want to say so much, and that's great, but time has really gone. So who wants to take that question? Yes. Yeah, so can one forget childhood trauma? If not, how should one live with it? And I think that also is the same as, can childhood trauma end at a later stage? Yeah, maybe those two. Yeah.
In my clinical opinion, it would be false to say that one would forget childhood trauma. However, I maybe see the angle from which they're coming. There's a concept called repression of trauma, which is, I guess, the mind and the body's way of pushing it down to the back of your consciousness. And in some cases, literally, if you go back to the neurobiology we've spoken about before, very possible to completely forget. Because when you're going through this trauma experiences, we discussed the fear center in the brain, which is the amygdala, connected to the limbic system, which is the emotions, which is then connected to the memories part of the system, the hippocampus. You're going through the thing, and it's trying to make sense of it. Rachel was explaining before, because you might maybe be too young, you don't know the words to put this terrifying or terrible experience. The memory is not laid down properly. You look at the science of how memories are imprinted in the brain. So in that sense, it may be like, oh, you have a vague recollection, you don't exactly remember, or for some people, it's just completely gone. Susan was saying you can dissociate during the experience and completely forget. But the thing is, these can be reactivated down the track. We might have a major trigger. Maybe you go somewhere, you see someone that looks familiar. There's some smell or some whatever that evokes that memory in your body. So again, this is a brain-body connection. And then suddenly this forgetting comes to the front and starts to show itself in your life. So in that sense, trauma, you can't really say it's forgotten. Maybe it will be repressed. It's only going to come up at a later stage. How to get through it? I guess if you get to the point where you've now starting to realize, I'm noticing there's lots of triggers, as Rachel was saying. Whenever I'm in this situation with this kind of person, I see certain. So it's good for us to get used to develop that self-awareness. It will all come down to seeking professional help. So those who think you might have forgotten something, say you lived in a family with a few other family members, if you feel up to it, you can, is it just me? Is it this thing that happened at whatever age and you lived wherever, and you remember that? And then that will help you sort of remember what happened. So, yes.
Just thank you, Angela. I think just to add on what Angela is saying, it can be suppressed, it can't go completely because there's always triggers. However, when you seek therapeutic services, particularly if you get a good practitioner to do CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, that is really helpful because they give you strategies. So they give you things that you can even write in your room or write wherever. Every time you feel that it almost like reinforces. So you always like self-teaching yourself so that you don't regress into thinking about and dwelling on it, but these things affirm you, and every time you read them, it actually brings you back, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much for that. Then I think we're going to look at the next question. Does trauma directed to pregnant women influence the unborn child? And I think Rachel responded to that earlier when you talked about what happens in the environment and how that affects the baby, the unborn child. So maybe we can go to the next question. Did you want to say something before? Okay.
Yes, so trauma can affect baby in utero. Yes, 100%.
Okay. Then the next question. This is quite a long question. How can you know as a parent? Oh no, that's one of the first parts. How can you know as a parent that children are going through any trauma in the family? Maybe we'll answer that first, and then we'll go to the next one. So how can you know as a parent that children are going through any trauma in the family?
I think we also spoke about that in regards to behaviors. When we say, my child doesn't listen, my child is kicking and hitting, and either in the home or at school, however that looks like, or my child really chooses to be really quiet, keeps to themselves. And also, I think as a parent, looking at what is it that makes you think, your child, you're attuned to your child, what makes you think that they're experiencing trauma? And I guess that's when you look at what else is happening within that environment. And also, how is your relationship like? How is that diet like? The parent-child space. Is that changing? How your child is interacting with you? How they're interacting with their siblings? Is there changes in that relationship? So, and you know your child. If you're attuned to your child, something's happening. So, and I guess that's that's when you seek help. You attune to your child and you talk to your child. Not just talking, but also doing to make them see that I see you, I'm here for you. If they don't say something, how you are with them is what matters the most, because as you said, also children are not able to make sense of things. So even you just putting it out there, hey, babe, you can talk to me anytime, just you can watch your child and see what works for them, what's working for them, the changes that are happening in them.
It's very common things if you see your child reverted into baby-like behaviors. So maybe they're 7 and they had stopped even wetting themselves and they begin wetting themselves. That's a really big sign to work for. And then also when they're giving stories and they're projecting as if it's somebody else, then it's actually interrogated because it could be them. And then also withdrawing and behaving, they have like almost animal-like, especially if they're 5 and below, or even 7 actually, even up to 10, they have animal-like behaviors. Like they would do things like a rat or a kangaroo or something. That's actually, they are running away from and hope that they were even something else. So those are just some of the really common things I've seen, especially supporting children.
Thank you so much for the answers. I'm not an expert in this field at all, but I also feel like as a parent, also acknowledging that you could be the source of the trauma, especially when you expose the children in toxic environment. Like if you're in a domestic violent marriage or a toxic relationship, you're definitely exposing your child to trauma, and you cannot wish that they're not going to be affected by the trauma. So I think that is also one way to know that, there is a very high possibility that they are being traumatized. The next question is, what can be done in adolescents or adults if you feel, or in adulthood, if you feel you've had a childhood trauma when young? Is there a solution to an adult, or is it too late to repair, especially trauma from loss of close family members and probably growing up in lack? Even after achieving in life, there's still that feeling of trauma. And I think Dr. Angie touched on that a bit, so maybe you just want to take that.
Very interesting question. Maybe can you just repeat the last part of it again? There was something about poverty and lack.
Rian? Yeah, is there a solution to an adult, or is it too late to repair, especially trauma from loss of close family members and probably growing up in lack? Even after achieving in life, there's still that feeling of trauma.
It's never too late to repair. As we've said, our brains are quite neuroplastic. There's always hope, I think, is a very important message we want to pass on. And it will probably come to like different levels in terms of solutions. One thing might be talking to your natural support, so the people who are naturally around you, which might be your close friends and family, it might be your spiritual counselors. But in this instance, it sounds like the trauma would be very much in a place of a professional space. So getting a counselor with whom in a safe therapeutic space, and they're an objective person. And I think that would make a lot of difference. They've got the capacity to sit with you, reflect on what you've been through, talk it through, and we've used this phrase a lot, unpack the different levels of what you're going through. If there's prolonged grief or complicated grief, with the loss of a loved one, that can leave you with different sorts of psychological, baggage. Things like fear of abandonment or fear of rejection or hanging on to relationships which are toxic because you fear you've lost someone in the past and you don't want to lose somebody again. So it would be very good with a cognitive behavioral or different other modalities of counseling to go through that and work it through and learn different ways of coping and different ways of relating that doesn't bring your past trauma into your present life.
Thank you very much.
We haven't spoken about grief much, but grief and loss is a very natural thing to happen. And it can be the time that it becomes problematic. It's when, as you said, prolonged grief is when that becomes a problem, because loss, people dying and us having to deal with that. That's a really normal part of life. And I guess if that is becoming so prolonged that it becomes a problem, I guess that's when we start to think about what is the beliefs that I have about grief. Do I feel like I shouldn't be grieving? Do I feel like, what are my feelings surrounding the sadness? Because you need to give yourself permission to grieve, and that's okay.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to go back on the floor and check if there's any other question. Yes.
Letting us know how to pick up trauma from a child. If I pick it up and I am the mother and I am the source of trauma, so I cannot help my child, where do I get my child help?
And I guess there's lots of services. Yeah, there's lots of services, but I guess the thing that keeps coming up is, are they culturally safe services for us? And that's when, as parents, individual parents, we also need to know what's okay and what's not okay within that counseling space, whereby all of me needs to be allowed to be in and needs to be validated. And if you're unpacking that, it needs to be in a safe and healthy manner, not made to be problematic. And I would have some ideas about where to get some counseling, but then also there's all of these, Sonda, there's one there for 5 to 11-year-olds. There you go. Yes, there is help. I'm happy to provide if anyone asks. We can research together. I guess, but also I think the part I struggle with also is, I guess, as the person, a clinician who works with parents and caregivers, children and caregivers, is there's the sense that we take our children to therapy to get fixed. That's really problematic. That's not how it should be. A child who is experiencing trauma, they can only heal in that relationship with their caregiver. So if you're taking your child to therapy, you also need to be prepared to be challenged in that space about how you're caregiving, how you're parenting your child, because they come out of that therapy room and they go into the context of family, in the context of society. So yes, you can choose to just take your child to therapy to be fixed, but there is also things that can be quite challenging for a parent to hear, that especially being the source of trauma, that also needs to be unpacked in, I guess, a good therapy environment. And you need to be prepared for that. You need to know that it's also you who's going to need to do the work, not just the child, because at the end of the day, you're everything to them. You're how they shape their world and how they go into the world. So just something to think about.
Thank you so much, Rachel. As Rachel was saying that, and as Antisha, you asked your question, I thought about when you're flying and they tell you to save yourself first before you save your child, because you need to be alive to save them. So in that context where you acknowledge that you have issues that you need to deal with yourself because you're creating that environment that's causing trauma to your child, you should be seeking for help first, because like Rachel says, you seek help, then you're creating a positive environment so that even when your child comes home, then they're in an environment where they can thrive. Otherwise, they go and get fixed, but then they come home, you unfix them. And the cycle continues. We still have a couple of questions to go through, but time has gone really, really quick. And I'm just wondering whether it's beneficial for us to take these questions back to the forum and then have a discussion and maybe come up with a write-up of the answers, which can then be disseminated in the forums that the invitations were sent. That way we are not rushing through, and then we are even maybe doing a bit of more research, and then everyone can go home. It's been quite a long day. How do we feel about that? Unless there's anyone with a pressing question or a comment that they want to give on the floor.
Group here, the name of the group, is there a connection point that we can, in between now and the next event?
Yes, very much so. The lady you're sitting next to is able to plug you in. So you're sitting at the right spot at the right time. Yes. I think we shall come to the end of our program today.
Just a second.
Sorry, coming to the last minute. I'm a mental health nurse, and it's good to hear from the panel and being on the receiving end. It's really good to know that the community is well informed. And when the patients are sent home, sometimes you see like a cycle. They go 2 weeks, they're back in hospital, and you tend to think what is happening, and probably is what I've noted is the community is not well informed to receive the person coming home after the treatment. But it's really good to see that the community is well informed and the awareness is great. Thank you so much for your time. People who came from far, doctor, and everyone else who is not in the mental health field. It's really encouraging to know that we are all either affected directly or indirect. So it is a domino effect. So whatever we've learned today, you go and pass it on to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you so much for starting me up with the vote of thanks. Thank you for thanking us. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. For those people who are tuned in online, thank you for being patient with us and for sitting through it to the end. People on the floor, thank you very much. I mean, we could be here talking to ourselves, but at least there's people looking at us, smiling at us, and giving us the energy to keep going. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our MC, my friend, Mr. Don. Please clap for him. Next time he'll lead us in the breathing exercises. I think today he's learned, right? So thank you very much. Our tech guys at the back, thank you very much. Please let's clap for them. And the photography and the person streaming us live, thank you very much. Clap for them. Makofi. And also for the people who prepared the snacks and the drinks and everything that we've had to eat. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank you, Auntie Shah, for bearing this vision and carrying it to this far. And thank you very much for everything. Thank you for wanting to see the difference in the lives of the people in Adelaide. And I know this is going to be one big thing one day, you know. We're just growing, and I can see how influential and, you know, we can get as a team. So thank you very much. I also want to thank the team that has been behind the planning of this day. There's been numerous hours that have been put in to see everyone sitting here. Our program has been drawn and all that. So for everyone who's here and those who are absent, thank you very much. Let's clap for them. And last but not least, these are millions sitting here. Can you imagine how much school fees that has gone into these people becoming isn't it? Yeah, there's a lot of school fees, a lot of experience, and also for your time. You know that I don't assume that you guys were just sitting somewhere thinking, oh, what do I do with my day? Or, you know, you have had to forgo a lot of things to be here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you for being so generous with your information. And I also want to thank you because I know you'll keep putting your hand up to be here more and more and more times until even if you move to the UK, we'll still expect you to fly. So thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. May God bless you so much. And this is not the end. This is only our second session, and we hope to have very many more in future, even as we continue to work together through this well-being mental health journey until we get to a point where we are all healed. We envision a state where we are all healed and we're only passing good things to our children, our children's children. So thank you very much. Have a lovely evening, and God bless you so much.
Were we praying?
I feel thanked.
Were we praying?
Oh my God. At least I said, God bless you, so you can understand. You know, at least there is a God element in my life. So, Dr. Zipporah is going to lead us in the closing prayer.
I think I can just do it.
Yeah.
It's true, in all things, we have to thank God. So let us pray. God, we come before you this evening with thanksgiving. Thank you for the fellowship that we have had. Thank you for all the presenters. Thank you for all we have had, because indeed we have learned things and we've been blessed, and you've shown a way forward for us to try and heal our relationships and ourselves. Thank you for the fellowship we have had, all the interactions, all the people here who came, all the people who are online, and all the ones who will listen to this later. May the whole information be helpful to them all, and may it help them in that journey of well-being. We can't thank you enough, God, because indeed you are able and you help us all to heal spiritually. Thank you for everybody who has contributed and all who have been involved in this, because it's through you that they have been able to do it. Now, as we leave, may we take all what we have heard to our hearts and practice it so that it may help us. And it's in Jesus' name we pray and believe. Amen.
Thank you so much for praying for us.
I know we have finished, but for me, that has been huge. And I want to thank everyone who has come in response to be a participant, because I have only appealed. It's only something God put in my heart. It wouldn't actualize without you. And if there is also somebody else out there in the community who still feels they would want to be a part of this, they are welcome to reach out to me, and we will be all inclusive. We need all the resources in our community. Thank you so much.
The earth shall soon dissolve like snow. The sun forbear to shine.